Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to My World with Jeff Jarrett, the Hall of Famer himself. Jeff, how are you, man?
Hello, Mr. Conrad Thompson.
Man, I'm
How
excited
you doing?
today.
Look, you're taking the lead on this thing. A bit overwhelmed from this past 72 hours, but I'm ready to do episode 2.
I'm ready to do it too, but before we do, I want to circle back to last week. Of course, it was probably the topic everybody wanted to hear the most. We called it the hold up. It was all about your last night in the WWF in 1999. And man, I thought we sort of tied up all the loose ends on there, but we got a ton of follow-up questions. And to no surprise, I guess the biggest thing that people were asking about is Jim Ross. And I think that I saw, I don't know, a handful of tweets who just assumed that you and Jim are cross and still have heat, brother. 55 Simon says, when did Jeff and Jim Ross next cross paths? From a quick scan of the timeline, Jeff would be rejoining WWE just as JR was leaving. Lots of people want to know, is there heat these days? Have you seen Jim Ross since? Are you guys cross? Chat me up.
And see, that's one of the fascinating things, Conrad, that sort of diving into the podcast world is, I think Eric likes to call it the narrative and just different contexts. And I think human nature is we all have very short memories or selective memory. But there was this little event in 2015 called Wrestle Kingdom 9.
Yep.
That New Japan Pro Wrestling approached me about taking it to pay-per-view. And me and you have had these conversations offline, but we'll tell the My World listeners, the main event for Wrestle Kingdom 9, in my eyes, although AJ Styles and Tanahashi and Okada and the Bullet Club and the Bucks, and I mean, what a loaded card and what a red hot product. But for me, I selected Jim Ross as the main event. So me and Jim, look, it was business in.
Hey, wait, hang on, timeout. You're skipping over a lot here. You were working with getting that program on Fight for the first time. And so I think when you're saying, well, I made him the main event, you mean in terms of pay-per-view promotion. You weren't necessarily working for New Japan at the time, but this was newfound territory for New Japan to have their event broadcast live here in America on Fight and with an English commentary, which had never been done before, right?
See, this is why you're the podfather. You clean things up and make sure the story. Yes, that is accurate. So, New Japan Pro Wrestling in Japan was red hot. They wanted to take their early stages, and they've done on different levels with WCW back in the day, but they wanted to take their product globally. And I'd gone over there a couple of times and as a on-screen character, joined the Bullet Club. But no, taking the product and putting it on pay-per-view in English commentary, we were going to do that, not just on Fight, but on In Demand, on DirecTV, on Dish Network. I mean, every pay-per-view home in North America, as well as back in those days, it was called Flips. And there's a whole episode on Flips, this event alone turned Flips into Fight TV. But anyway, JR, the voice of wrestling. And so, going back to 1999, it was business. And I knew it was business. And to this day, I don't know if Vince McMahon told Jim Ross cut his pay. I don't really know. It's kind of irrelevant. Jim was obviously the messenger. It is what it is. It was what it was. But no, me and Jim Ross worked together on Wrestle Kingdom 9. There's another story that comes along right in the middle of all this is World of Sport, ITV, the rebirth of that in 2017 or 2016 into 17. That I really thought there was going to be a huge opportunity, but WWE got wind of it. They brought Jim and gave him his jersey back, was Jim's quote, I believe. The people at ITV, as well as myself, were devastated that we lost Jim. He was going to be a huge part of that product. NXT UK was somewhat launched off the heels of the ITV product. So me and Jim worked together in 2015, had multiple conversations and basically kept a running conversation. Jim is a guy that through the Japan trip, and Conrad, I don't even know if you know this story, but through the Japan trip, Karen went with me, and the dynamic of Jeff and Karen and the blended family and 5 kids, and his agent, Barry Bloom, asked Jim, hey, Jim, do you know any couples that might have a blended family or might have basically a somewhat of a normal day job, soccer mom, corporate dad, but then they have extracurricular activities? And Jim said, Barry, hell, do I think I know one? I just got off a flight with him. So Jim not introduced me to Barry, but that whole connection, which later introduced me, I'm telling you, there's 6 degrees of Jeff Jarrett in so many ways. Jim, through Barry, introduced me to Arthur Smith. He's the executive producer of Hell's Kitchen and Ninja Warrior. And also he was my partner in Global Force Wrestling. So me and Jim have worked together. There's zero heat and hasn't been. Was that long-winded?
Yeah, you're the new Eric Bischoff there. You're the new Eric Bischoff. I asked you what time it was. You told me how to make a watch, but we got the answer, right? There's no heat. And by the way, that Wrestle Kingdom, pretty impressive card. Tanahashi and Okada on top, Nakamura and Ibushi right underneath for the IWGP Intercontinental. AJ was working with Naito. Of course, Kenny Omega's on the card. There's a lot of talent on that show. And
I can't wait to do that episode. Seriously.
I'm with you in that. I had not seen a New Japan Wrestle Kingdom live until Jim Ross was doing commentary. And when I was asking you about that off air, I don't know, a few weeks ago, you were explaining to the folks who were helping produce the spot. And I think it's, as you refer to him, Sully, Kevin Sullivan, not the devil, the guy who makes TV in Nashville, who these days is working with AEW. And he didn't really get what you were looking for in terms of the promotion and the teasers. And you said, as far as I'm concerned, Jim Ross is the main event. And I'm sure some New Japan fans these days would take great issue with that. But the reality is it got people like me who knew that New Japan had great wrestling, but didn't really understand all the names of the characters or their personas or their movesets or their stories. I needed somebody to sort of give me the lyrics, and who better than Jim Ross? And I bought that show and was immediately hooked, and I never missed it on Access, et cetera, et cetera. So I became a big New Japan fan because Jim Ross did commentary there. And to your credit, that was kind of your idea, and you saw the vision for that, and you were right.
And you just hit on something, and we'll move on past this. But JR said a line, and we both got marketing minds. But as a build up to Wrestle Kingdom 9, JR said, the wrestlers write the music, I write the lyrics.
Yeah.
And that is so accurate. And JR sat out at ringside for a 5-hour show, never took a bathroom break, unproduced, didn't have somebody in his ear. He took that. I mean, those are one of those nights when it's over. Sometimes, and certainly that night, I just went, wow, Tanahashi isn't good. He's great. But also when I got home and got to hear JR's, the replay of it, you just go, that's why he's the greatest voice in wrestling. And that's a really, really good event.
Well, let's get to why we're here today. Of course, last week we talked about the holdup, and now you know your answer. No heat with Jim Ross and Jeff Jarrett. I saw some people joking online that, oh, if Conrad ever does StarCast again, they're going to have a fight. No, we're not. There's no heat, brother. We're all on adfreeshows.com, and you can get all our shows early and ad free. And
I'd love to have a debate with JR up about it. Say, Jim,
will you stop? Look at you just stirring it up.
I'm kidding. It was, hey, but let me ask you this. You just again referred to it as the holdup. Do you think I know that's a headline for you.
It's the name of the episode. We name the episodes, Jeff. So episode 1 is the holdup.
But was it really a holdup?
Yeah, you used a pea shooter. We talked about it last week. It's in the archive. Fired on national TV is the episode of today. Boy, there's a lot to unpack here. And if you think we're just going to talk about the firing, I hate to disappoint you. We're going to set the stage. We're going to give you context because, as Eric says, context is king.
Cash is king, but context is queen.
No, there you go. World Championship Wrestling is supposedly for sale. And there's a rumor out there that it wasn't just Eric Bischoff chomping at the bit to get his hands on it. And of course, we know it winds up with Vince McMahon. But another name that was often discussed is Jerry Jarrett. Your dad supposedly threw his hat in the ring, and he wrote about this in his books. And I'm sure we'll talk about all of that in long form some other time. As far as your experience with your dad. But did you have conversations with your dad about, hey, Dad, What about WCW?
I mean, and you know, at that time I had 2 kids, a newborn, so to speak, or 1-year-old, and you know, working an awful lot and life going on, and you know, Nitro and Thunder, and I'll say the craziness of WCW, and a lot of times, especially during, I don't say late 90s too, when I got off the road. As I've told you, I had, you know, I didn't have a man cave with belts and this. Wrestling was my vocation. It was my job. And so when I got off the road, I didn't really talk a lot of wrestling. A lot was going on, you know, just with family and, you know, kids playing sports, my youngest or my oldest playing sports. Anyway, so the long and short of it was, yes, we had a few conversations, me and my father, but I never, he might not like me saying this, I never took it serious. I just didn't, because I think first and foremost, in my mind, you know, what I know now versus what I knew then as far as the television industry. But look, it was TBS 605, you know, dating back to the 80s, and wrestling's there, and they're not going to take this off. And as crazy as it is, it's corporately owned. Now, does it need to be restructured and retooled? Yes, like any business. But I just never really thought, I didn't take it serious at all, but I knew he had investment bankers out of Boston. I mean, he was in deep discussions and very excited. But at the same time, he was excited about that. You've got to put into full context, knowing my dad. I mean, my dad has been a wrestling promoter, second generation, and everything goes with it. But he's gone through different times in his life where he's bought and sold land, where he's traded knives, where he's had car lots and bought another car lot. And then from that car lot, hired 3 or 4 salesmen. He's always had sort of hobbies. At times he'd go fishing every day, all day for 3 weeks on time. So he's always been a bit eccentric in his hobbies, if you will, and even in his business, side businesses, if you will. And so at that time, he had started a relationship with BP Oil. And at that time, BP was re-imaging gas stations. And so like he was contracted to do 3. Conrad, next thing you know, he's got like a contract to do 400.
Oh, wow.
Oh, it just was crazy. I mean, he geared up. So anyway, he had re-imaging BP gas stations. He was the land that we grew up on and a couple other pieces of property. He was putting in road, water, and sewer. So he was in the real estate development business. And he had come off, and here's where it relates back to wrestling. He had basically come off his executive run with Vince and his consulting deal. And a lot of people don't ever talk about that. He was a consultant for WCW. And so I knew that he had a bad taste in his mouth from the WCW experience, because he didn't really do a lot, but got paid. I just didn't take it serious.
There was even a point where he was getting paid by both WCW and the WWE, because even when he moved back home from Stanford, he wrote about this in his book, they kept sending checks, and he would call payroll and say, "Hey, I'm not there anymore. I'm not coming back. I'm not getting checks." And they said, "This is what Vince wants." He takes that consulting job with WCW, and I'm glad you brought it up, because that was where I was going next. And now there for a little while, he's getting paid by both. And eventually, when he finally gets a hold of somebody, he says, "Guys, this is like 3 weeks in a row. I've gotten paid by y'all. I'm actually working for WCW." Then the checks from WWE finally stopped. But it is interesting that he kept relationships strong enough everywhere, because when WCW was in trouble, let's talk about it now, there's a lot of guys who say, "Hey, who can pull the nose up on this thing? We tried the Eric Bischoff thing. He's gone. We've tried the Vince Russo thing. He's gone. Now we've got corporate Turner folks." And the name that keeps coming up from guys like Kevin Sullivan, and especially his old pal, JJ Dillon, is, "Oh, you got to talk to Jerry Jarrett. Jerry Jarrett knows how to do this." And of course, Jerry wants to come in and right size payroll and a bunch of other expenses. And of course, not all of that happens. So I'm sure he was frustrated.
None of it happened.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to mention, because there's a name that comes up, it's even in your dad's book, and it popped up in that great book that Guy Evans wrote called Nitro. And if you haven't read that, Jeff, I'm going to get you a copy, but Eric Bischoff and I absolutely love it. Lenita Erickson. Did you ever meet Lenita? Did Jerry ever tell you about Lenita? Because this comes out of left field for a lot of our listeners, but JJ lines up a meeting with Lenita Erickson, and your dad supposedly is like, "Well, who the hell is this?" And it turns out she had weaved her way in to Turner Corporate and had a little bit of, pardon the pun, stroke. What can you tell us about Lanita?
I just remember the name. What's her background? Music?
Well, yes, music, but her controversial background, the reason a lot of music fans may know her, is once upon a time she hung around with Gene Simmons from Kiss.
Yes.
And Gene may or may not have had a lady friend with a baby and all that jazz. And so she made some of that stuff very public, and it's sort of a blemish on Lanita Erickson's career, if you will. But she was behind the scenes with Turner, and there for a while thought, I'm going to be able to be in the power seat here for this organization, World Championship Wrestling. And Jerry Jarrett can sort of be my confidant, if you will. And I just am fascinated by the idea that he could have perhaps went from consultant to consigliere to Lanita Erickson for WCW. And then when that doesn't work, he says, you know what? These guys don't know what they're doing. Let me put together some money and make this thing work. So he reviewed the books, made an offer. Ultimately, it didn't come together. But man, how different. It's fun to sort of think, what if your dad got a hold of WCW?
And the thing, and look, to me, that's just another slice of the loaf of bread of how crazy things were that I didn't believe. I think so much of it was like, saying real, what is really going on here? But if I remember correctly, Hawk's the one who told Eric, I think, hire Jerry Jarrett.
Yeah.
And fast forward now to, my dad consulting. And again, I'm not really involved in any of that. And church and state, we kept separate, but then I remember that name and I just thought, what is going on? And JJ Dillon, as you said, my dad's friend, I was not involved in any of that day to day, but I do know that, this set of circumstances, but I just remember because I always thought, okay, if you're getting in business, where's this money coming from? And it was corporate money out of Boston.
So let's talk about your dad for a minute before we move on. I don't mean to bring up a sore subject, but like with a lot of families, there's been challenges at different points. You and your dad have not always, you've always loved your dad, I'm sure, but you and your dad have not always gotten along. What was your relationship like here and say, we'll call it late 2000, early 2001?
Wow. So the good news is I had lunch with him yesterday.
Right. Everything's great now. Yeah.
That's okay. But you sort of to weave through it, and we'll get into this in my 7 years of USWA. But those weren't the easiest times in my life. Look, I'm the young punk. I'm the promoter's kid. I've got to make an example out of him. I'm going to make him go cut Jerry Lawler's yard. I mean, so those formative years, WCW came knocking when I was working in Dallas. He said no. Didn't really know it at the time. Huge resentment started to build there. Wait a minute. How long do I got to quote unquote pay my dues here?
Right.
Me and Scott Steiner were friends from '87. He goes off and makes money. Undertaker comes through. Stone Cold Steve Austin came through. All these different talents that come through, and they'd gone on to WCW, and they're making guaranteed money. And it goes without saying. I mean, I could say name after name after name, and I'm still in the family territory and ready to go. Nope, you're not ready. Nope, you're not ready. So fast forward up, I finally get to Vince in '93 and go through that run, and then bounce back and forth and all that. So by 2000, and I now at my in my age, looking back on that young 30-year-old, 31-year-old kid, listening to my old man at that stage of the game about this industry that he quote unquote ran the territory, and now I'm working in the big major productions and this and that. And like any father-son relationship, it was super strained at the time in so many ways. Add in the mix of Jill's health.
Yep.
In the mix of life and grandkids and siblings, and he's out of the business. And obviously he doesn't like a lot of the content that went through the 90s and the Attitude Era. And I'm thinking, no, but you aren't seeing the business being done. So there was a bad taste collectively in both of our mouths about the industry. And he probably didn't like what I had to say, and I didn't give a damn. And I didn't like what he had to say about the business, and he didn't give a damn. So it wasn't a wonderful Thanksgiving meal every year around that time.
So in a weird way, because I think most people would assume, just hearing, well, Jerry Jarrett might buy WCW, I think most people would assume you're like, oh God, this is what I've been waiting on. If Dad gets his hands on this thing, in reality, you're probably thinking, fuck, I kind of hope not.
You hit the nail on the head. Here's the deal. I did not believe it would eat anything remotely close of a possibility. When I heard that he actually had the investment bankers and lined up and really drilled down on the numbers, and for whatever reason, the number comes up, they made 100 million, but spent 110 million. And I'm thinking to myself, that number's got to be crazy. But then when he starts talking about talent and production and overhead and this and that, and I'm thinking, man, he has peeled the layer of this onion back multiple ways. Wow, this is getting interesting. But not long after that, because I asked him who else is up for it. He said, oh, there's others. He never came out and said Bischoff. He didn't. Later he did once the news was out. But I can remember asking him, like, what's really going on, and how are you going to sell this business? But the network, they're still going to have it on their air. None of that really, it just didn't add up.
It's worth mentioning. I mean, the number I remember off the top of my head, and maybe fuzzy memory. It's been a while since I read your dad's book, but I think he looked at the books, and anytime you're doing, I guess we should back up. Anytime you're going into a big business deal like this, there is a period for what's called due diligence. So we get to sort of look under the hood. I'm going to look at their books. I'm going to see it warts and all. What's the money coming in? What's the money going out? And then I can have at least an informed chance at making an informed decision here about what I'm about to do with a pile of cash. And supposedly your dad felt like, I can cut the overhead by $40 million right away, and we're profitable. Now, how he gets there, of course, as we said, is a series of cutbacks and reimagining house shows and expenses and taping schedules and all that. But I'm curious, what, if anything, did he share with you when he was merely a consultant with WCW? You're on the road, you're performing for the company. When you do get together with your dad, I'm sure work comes up. Does he say, son, XYZ? I'm not saying in regards to creative. I know he didn't like that. That's been well documented. He didn't like the quote unquote Russo style. I'm not saying that to disparage Russo. I'm just saying it's a departure from what he did in Memphis. But I'm saying, forget creative for a minute. The business, the dollars and cents. Yes. When he's consulting, does he say to you, son, did you know, or anything like that? Does that come up?
I almost got 100% out of me. And the sidebar, look, you guys bring up. So anyways, 100%. I had no idea that was such a part of my
crutch of yours. Yeah, it's cool. I have them too. I say, chat me up, and I say, let's keep it moving here. And we've all got ours. So don't you back up on 100%. And so anyway, they're over now.
Okay. But the thing that he would say, son, and that's when he's serious, because remember, my deal was predicated on a downside or a weekly check plus live events,
right?
And doing all that, and he would ask, like, do these guys really not make live events? And what's the vibe? And what do you think about the talent? And I would, like Hall and Nash, and he would ask me, are they over? So I'm not trying to get into the creative, but it is the business. I'm like, are they over? Yeah, they're over. And so is this guy. And so is this guy. I mean, I said, the talent, I said, there aren't just a few stars. There is a enormous amount of talent. I mean, Goldberg, when you look at that roster in 2000, 2001, it kind of wrapping your head around it. You just go
crazy. It's crazy.
Oh my God. I mean, the Millionaires Club, the angle that they shot, that was all the real deal. Everybody standing on the stage is making $1 million. Hall, Nash, Hogan, go ahead. Yeah, I know you're.
It's not just legacy stars. AJ Styles is on that roster.
It's crazy.
There's a lot of like the next big things. They're there too.
Yes.
So anyway, let's just keep it going here.
But anyway, to your question, he would ask me, and I'm saying yes. And going back to my Memphis days, either Lawler was the boss or Jerry Jarrett was the boss. And when they were the boss, the buck stopped with them, the end all be all. And he would ask, and I'm going, it's just that simple. There is not one boss. It's never going to work. And he's like, yeah, that's got to change. Yep, that's got to change.
Let's talk about WCW as a whole, because at home, I have to admit, I guess I'm 19 at the time, not quite 20, but WCW had been a part of my life, my entire wrestling fandom. I became a wrestling fan in 1988. So as long as I had been a wrestling fan, WCW was here. They were a part of it. I couldn't imagine a world without WCW. You're even more deeper ingrained in all this. You're getting a check every 2 weeks from WCW. Did you ever think WCW was actually ever going to A, close, or B, be sold? It
Never.
just felt like it'd been a part of Turner forever.
Never. And knowing that, coming from the territory days and how USWA was literally the last territory, and it was driven because we hung on here because we were getting paid from the Memphis TV station. So just the simple business economics that, yes, quote unquote, it had turned into a TV company. And I'm like, that's the leg up. It's going to be around forever because the ratings are good. And it is, relatively speaking, dirt cheap to produce. It does, it's not baseball. It's not basketball. It's not some big Hollywood production. It's quote unquote a wrestling show. And us going to Orlando, ironically, at Universal Studios to shoot, 6 weeks at a time TV tapings. That's why I thought the business model needed to change. And look, we can talk about creative forever, but it ain't going nowhere. Like there's zero chance to this day. It's a few head scratchers on it, but I just didn't think it was I just didn't think I thought there was zero chance of it going away.
I don't want to jump into a ton of WCW creative, but do you remember there being a moment where something creatively happened and you thought, that might have killed the town. That might be the one that when we look back in WCW as fans, we can point to, oh, the Arquette thing, oh, the finger poke of doom, oh, they made Russo champion. We could rattle on all these different examples. But when we look at, hey, let's point a finger to when WCW leveled up. It's that Hogan Flair thing at Bash at the Beach in 94. It's Hogan turning heel in 96. There are these like major moments where it's like after this, everything was different. It's Nitro starting. Those are probably the three big building blocks where you're like, oh man, we're on a trajectory. But you could also probably point to, fans do all the time, well, it started with the finger poke of doom and then blah, blah, blah. Was there a moment as a wrestler on the inside getting paid by this company where you thought, that might be the beginning of the end?
I can tell you the vibe. I don't know if I can point myself to any one finger, but Bronco Lubitsch was the referee out in Dallas, WCCW, yep. And I would make car rides with him and ask him different things. And he was very appreciative of my old man coming out there. And I asked him one time, Bronco, what happened to you? And he did not even skip a beat. He said, Jeff, it's real simple. When the boys quit showing up or only showed up when they wanted to and started missing towns, when the non-TV events became less and less important and not every Friday night where they dialed in, the air was let out of the room and they never could put the toothpaste back in the tube. Fast forward to WCW, when I would show up on a live event and it would be, and I don't want to name names, but you didn't have any millionaire club there.
Hall, Kevin Nash, Hulk Hogan. Yeah.
Get I don't call it a program, but a sheet that this is the newspaper ad or this is what was advertised. And like 6 people out of the 10 that were advertised are not there. I said, this ain't good. I mean, it ain't good. It just put a bad tone in front of the people behind the screen. So the big wave the white flag, we don't care. The people felt it. I still think that the communication between the brand and the fan was not ever one event. It was, they don't care. So why should we not care? Why should we care? I think it's that simple, although it's not that simple. But when the talent quit caring, the fan quit caring.
Let me give you an example here. I just randomly pulled the show up here. This is from Minnesota, August 18th, 2000. There's 2,755 fans in the arena. Only 822 of them paid. The card is Yang and Hayashi against Helms and Moore. Crowbar defeated David Flair. The Great Muta and Vampiro defeated the Demon in a handicap match. Norman Smiley beat Big Vito.
Wait. Say that match right there.
Norman Smiley and Big Vito.
Oh.
Muta and Vampiro against the Demon in a handicap match.
Okay. Just let that sink in, but keep going.
Rey Mysterio and Juventud against Chronic and Jindrak and O'Hare. And then Douglas beat Lex Luger. Lance Storm beat Mike Awesome. And your main event in a lumberjack match, Stevie Ray versus Jeff Jarrett. And again, I think me and you're on the same page here. We're not disparaging anyone, but your main event is Jeff Jarrett and Stevie Ray in a lumberjack match.
Stevie's a tag team wrestler.
And there's 822 paid.
And Lex Luger, because he came in and had to crawl and scratch and came off the Lex Express, he didn't have dates. He probably had 150 dates or 200 dates. They didn't have to worry about dates. So Lex made everything. I can remember making trips with Lex. I bet you me and Lex rode together that night. But that says that's a very good example of WCW. There, and I do you remember me and Stevie Ray ever working a program?
Nope. To your point, back in the day, the fundamental reason the business grew is you use TV as an infomercial to get you to buy tickets.
There you go.
So we're going to have a hot angle on TV and we're going to tease it, but we're not going to give it to you. Instead, you're not going to see Flair versus Ronnie Garvin with that knockout punch. You're going to see Flair versus George South, but at the end, Ronnie's going to knock him out, but they're wrestling tonight at the Charlotte Coliseum. So that's what the whole concept of a house show match was. We're going to get you excited on TV, but if you want to see the payoff, well, that's $20. We'll see you at the gate. That didn't happen here. You're not working a program with Stevie Ray. So the TV, whatever you're doing on TV, has nothing to do with what we're seeing here. This is simply, okay, who's showing up and who likes each other and who can put a match together. But it almost exists in a vacuum. It doesn't support your television product.
Did I hear you right? It's a stipulation match?
Lumberjack match.
I mean, which further dilutes the product. And again, right hand, left hand, right foot, left foot. That's somebody booking a live event that's not writing TV.
Right.
Period.
Because as we know, a lumberjack match is when you're in a heated feud and these guys keep trying to, powder out and get a count out or a DQ, and we're not going to let that happen anymore. So today it's a lumberjack match, but instead it's a lumberjack match randomly with you. And
we move on. I just reliving it. I have a funk coming over me, but no, go ahead.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. It's important to note, you guys had a San Francisco 49ers match, and we'll talk about it another time, but this is at the Cow Palace, a legacy wrestling town, a legacy wrestling building. Pat Patterson sold it out untold times. New Japan did a pay-per-view there a few years ago. I mean, WCW ran a ton of pay-per-views. It's a big time wrestling town. And we've got, for this Nitro, 1,941 fans at the Cow Palace. Just 8 months prior to that at Super Brawl, you had 8,500 paid fans. In 8 months, we went from 8,500 to 1,900, 2,000, man. I mean, I think Tony Schiavone described WCW as a coffin on roller skates.
Wow. Okay. That number, 8,500 something. So from 8,500, and I'd love to know, because in the promotion mindset, that yes, we're going to take in collectively between San Francisco Super Brawl. Is that what you said it was?
Yeah.
And this Nitro, we're going to take in 7 or 8 months worth of content.
Yeah.
But let's think about the paying customers. What did they see at Super Brawl? Because what you left them with, those 8,500 fans that night, they didn't like. That's not, no, they didn't like what was put on in Super Brawl in droves. Now, look, yes, there's obviously mitigating factors and what's on TV and what's driving them. And this and that. And we're going to talk about the silliness of the San Francisco box match. And I don't want to leave out the most important player in that match, Beetlejuice, but that's another discussion. But whatever was delivered in February or March, they didn't come back.
What's hilarious about that is it's Jeff Jarrett in the main event with Scott Hall and Sid Vicious in a 3-way dance. Underneath, it was Hogan and Lex.
Did Scott stay down in the ring that night?
I don't remember.
Yeah, look on the report. I can tell you, Scott got hurt, and the whole that. I bet you, if you look back on, I don't want to draw Meltzer into this. I don't think it was a good show.
I'm sure.
I don't know. I'd love to.
No, here's a spoiler. It was WCW in 2000. It wasn't a good show.
Okay, man, chat me up.
From there, you guys did a tour of Australia, though. I mean, fresh off the heels of that sort of San Francisco match, you did a tour of Australia that was supposedly a successful tour for WCW. And I think this may or may not have been where we saw some guys get themselves in a little bit of trouble over there. But it's interesting because, and we'll talk about this in other episodes, when it felt like TNA's business once upon a time was sort of on the ropes here in America, man, you guys go over to the UK and it's a whole new world.
Yeah.
And that was the case here for WCW with Australia. Do you remember that Australian tour here in 2000?
Very well. Very well. I can remember one of the memories was getting on, and I think every seat in the big jumbo jet, first class, was a WCW talent or employee. With the amount of people that flew over was massive, but it was, it was Nitro and Thunder and a big deal, and the promoter, it was a really, really big deal from a corporate perspective. I just remember the months, I say months, but all the planning that went into it, and we need to get Sting there. Just the different, the big money talent. Are they going? Are they not going? It was a big deal. And I'm not talking about it from a creative perspective, but from a corporate perspective, what a great opportunity. And they're going to be big houses.
Hypothetically, did the success of that tour inspire Andrew McManus to take a stab later?
100%. Yes.
So,
but definitely. And Australia, English speaking, that they just don't get a lot of entertainment down there. And so them getting the opportunity to get Nitro and Thunder, and you got to remember, we're on the heels of the last 3 years of how successful the Attitude Era was. And WWF wasn't in that market, and WCW was. So yes, the whole country took it by storm. So, and McManus was well aware of that.
Well, we're going to talk a lot more about McManus here in 2 weeks. The name of that episode coming up in 2 weeks is what we're calling Not a Boat Story. So stay tuned for that. There's way more to that story than anybody knows. Let's fast forward to January 11th. We're in 2001 now, and it's announced that Jerry Jarrett did not win the bid, unfortunately. Fusion Media has come to an agreement to purchase World Championship Wrestling, and Eric Bischoff is in the catbird seat. When you get that news, is that exciting, motivating? I mean, WCW enjoyed their greatest success under Eric Bischoff, but a lot of people would point the finger at him and say he overspent on talent and didn't maybe manage the money the way your dad would have. From your standpoint, as a talent who's working there, Eric coming back, is that a good thing?
I immediately went to, yes. The short answer is we can point a finger, right or wrong. That's the boss. That's the
Yes.
thing. It immediately jumped off the page. But then I think that's obviously the first time I heard the name of Fusion Media, but Brian Badal.
Yeah.
I get that name. But I like, okay, who are the partners? What's their background? How are we going to navigate through this? But the big $1 million question is, okay, a media company's buying it. Where does Turner fit into this? What's the relationship moving forward? Which was unclear, because you got to remember, I'm used to brought up in the territory days, and nobody owned the TV stations, but there was a one boss. But then, the Turner company bought out NWA, and so they're the bosses. So is Eric the boss, and it's staying on TNT and TBS? Are we going from 2 shows to 1 show? What's the blueprint? What's moving forward? How are they going to cut expenses? Look, again, the business head is, who's going and who's staying. because what's going on right now is unsustainable, period.
Let's keep it going here, because I'm curious to see, what you're thinking in terms of the way the business has changed. Because around this time, WCW, Turner specifically, of course, let's call it like it is. They realize, man, we're hemorrhaging cash. We got to start cutting back where we can and how we can. And one of the things they do is they cut down house shows. And you probably, based on what we learned last week, you start to see your income take a dip as a result of that, right?
Yes. And not happy. And like, I'll be damn, because I had a really good deal and making really good cash. We'll call it year one. But knowing the things just weren't sustainable, and the craziness, it goes without saying, the craziness in creative and talent, we'll call it talent relations and creative. It was just, nobody was a boss. And, the bash at the beach in 2000, and it just, how are we going to keep rowing? And by cutting out live events, one of the first thoughts that came to my mind is, why would you do that? Just start putting the stars that are on TV, on the house shows, and scale back. We don't need to run Little Rock or Dallas back in those days. What was it called? Not American Airlines Arena, but why run the big arenas? Run the Springfield Massive. Run the smaller arenas with the talent that's on TV. But just completely pulling house shows. But remember in 91, 92, when they shut down all house shows. I mean, so the ebb and flow of it. But again, a corporate decision. We're going to cut our nose off, spite our face, and we're going to pull out of live events. And how are our guys going to get in ring? How are they going to get better? Because we had a ton of guys that were young, that were some of them fresh out of the power plant, that needed reps. I was aware of that. It just, again, I thought it was a really bad decision. Obviously, it personally hurt my paycheck, but I didn't think that was anything close to the answer.
You were comfortable talking about money last week, so I guess I feel more comfortable bringing it up. But friends of the show, Chris Harrington, who's now doing big things with AEW, and Mr. David Bixenspan compiled all of the contract data that they could find from the WCW roster through all the legal proceedings. And they showed that your contract value for payroll in the year 2000 was $535,621. They showed you also got $4,351 in merch, for a total of $539,972. But it sounds like, based on
what year was that?
2000.
Okay.
So your total was $539, but that probably didn't include house show payoffs. Or would it have included house show payoffs?
That's because it was 350 and 450, or 350 and 400 guaranteed.
Okay, so maybe it does.
Yeah, I would assume yes.
Okay. So either way, though, we see that, your base is strong, but the way you really get that extra cheese on your Whopper, as JR likes to say, is through the house shows, and now those are gone.
And I'll say this, because last week's episode, it jarred, even more memory. I can remember thinking, if I can double because it's the conversation I had with Bill Bush, if I can double my guaranteed in year one and year two, year three, the psychology, okay, then I can get $750,000 plus my house show. That's what I was going to. And knowing what JR and Vince were willing to, yes, that sounds right. I guess what I'm saying is, in my mind, I'm trying to validate, yes, I think that included house show money.
Your income goal, though, you recall being 750. Like, if we put it all together, I want to get closer to that 750 number.
I want to get, yes, there was yes, correct.
A few years prior to this, I'm not saying in 2000, but we'll call it, 4 or 5 years prior to this, there was a phrase in the business known as sting money. That was like that 600,000-700,000, right? Correct. Sting money.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's everybody's goal. Let's get the sting money. So we mentioned Fusion Media makes the announcement on January 11th. A few days later, there's a big pay-per-view, WCWCN. We'll probably cover it in long form some other time. But the main event is Scott Steiner, Jeff Jarrett, Sid Vicious, and Road Warrior Animal is the big surprise. So he's last to the ring. Unfortunately, that's when Sid Vicious had a horrific incident where he destroyed his leg live on pay-per-view. When the big payoff was Road Warrior Animal, did you think, hey, this is a shot in the arm, or hey, that was a good idea 10 years ago? I don't know that it's a big draw and a big surprise now. Or did you feel like, hey man, they just bought Eric Bischoff's coming back, Road Warriors here, I'm in the main event, maybe we're going to pull the nose up on this thing?
I was a Road Warrior fan from way back.
Everybody was.
And I didn't like the vibe of him being not so much a mystery, but seeing a Road Warrior with a sheet over his head and covered up didn't do much for me.
It was silly.
There was just, again, one of those things that maybe in a booking room make Road Warrior Animal the surprise, but the actual execution, and he's not coming through with the shoulder pads and, oh my God, there's Joe, there's Animal. I mean, it was just another proverbial, as they say, fart in church.
So after that, we're going to the next pay-per-view, and we're marching towards Super Brawl Revenge. You're going to be working a program with Diamond Dallas Page. Is your political brain at all thinking, well, now this might be a good thing? I'm working with Dallas. We all know that Dallas is pals with Eric. That can't be a bad thing to be working with Diamond Dallas Page. Or was that even on your radar at that point?
Well, when you think about, you just said the prior month was, and we won't get into the leg break today, thank goodness. God.
Yeah.
But me and DDP had worked a year prior to that and really enjoyed it. And I can remember, and I just talked to Alice a week ago. We always creatively, we always outside, but we got along. He showed up to work always, and I did too. Yeah. And so during this time, and then that was approached, we didn't really have any storylines going on, neither one of us. So us getting put together, quote unquote, it's the night off.
Yeah.
But put it in context with him being friends with Eric, I thought to myself, yep, Jeff's the workhorse. I'll get this job done. We'll go out and have some fun. I enjoyed it.
So the other thing that we've heard, right or wrong, you can correct us, is that Johnny Ace was sort of the eyes and ears for Eric Bischoff at the time. And Johnny Ace, of course, had been a major player over in Japan with the Baba family and organization. And of course, his Ace Crusher became the hottest move in the business here in the States under different names. But he is also the brother of Road Warrior Animal. It's weird how it all just sort of ties together. But what was your read on Johnny Ace at the time? Did you feel like, hey, maybe he's not exactly the big boss, but he gets it and he's one of the boys and he's good for us? Or, is the old narrative of, oh, anybody in that position's a stooge? That's not fair, but that's what people say of, anybody who's in talent relations, if you will. It's the heat position. We just talked about it last week. Your deal came to an end with WWF, and people to this day assume, oh, you must hate that guy. No, he's doing his job. What was your read on Johnny Ace here in 2000 and 2001, actually, with WCW?
It's funny you ask, because when you told me this was the topic and I started just jogging the brain, I specifically, as the lead up to all this, remember a flight. Me and Johnny were in first class, sitting side by side on the aisle, and we chatted. And at one time we stood up because I don't know if one of us went to the bathroom, whatever, and he said, but we basically stood for about an hour chatting about, you name it, life, wrestling, finishes, and all this. But I remember that I got the distinct feeling that he's feeling me out. And me and Johnny, even though the last couple of years we worked together side by side a lot, I don't think we ever even discussed this, but I remember thinking he's feeling me out, and I know that I'm feeling him out. But the thing that I couldn't wrap my head around was, I wonder if he realizes what he's stepping into. Not that he really cares, because at the end of the day, I'd heard his reputation in Japan. He's a Finnish guy. And look, I'd been over Japan a couple of times. I just knew American finishes and Japan finishes are not in the same ballpark, especially in the year 2000. So, he's going to be talent relations, but also a Finnish guy. And he was going to help me with finishes. And this ties into this story. It tied back into Bash at the Beach, but also during this whole sort of changeover of deal, that I'm thinking to myself, he's going to have to make sense out of finishes from the current creative mess with all the different names. That ain't going to be easy. And we had that conversation, but him being I didn't think of it, stooge. Basically, he's a part of Eric's due diligence in that team. But what is it going to look like? Like how's it going to move forward? We both felt each other out on that flight. But I didn't really know what his specific role was going to be in the new company. I understood what his role was. You know, I know that coming off the Sid leg break, you know, I think a lot of people put heat on Johnny because he told Sid, jump off the second rope to do this move. And I think it ended up in litigation over that, that Sid said that he didn't want to do it, but Johnny made him do it in fear of losing his job and all this. That is a true story. What I recall is that Johnny wanted him to do this move and Sid didn't feel comfortable. He did it and broke his leg. So, but again, Johnny being Joe's brother and look, it's the business. Johnny was one of the boys in my eyes at the end of the day.
Listen, if you're looking for your own summer of no worries, it is calling you, and our friends at Factor can help you out. You can fuel up the summer with Factor's no prep, no mess meals. Meet your wellness goals in time for summer thanks to the menu of chef-crafted meals with options like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. So no matter how busy you are, you'll always have time to enjoy nutritious, great tasting meals. Look, you don't come back from the summer of no worries and look as incredible as Jeff Jarrett did unless you're keeping a healthy routine. And with Factor, you can do that. What are you waiting for? 35 different meals, more than 60 add-ons to choose from. Every week, you'll always have new flavors to explore. And look, a lot of people talk about how diets or any kind of stuff like that, when you get a healthy routine, they're worried about the flavor and worried about what kind of food you're going to eat. Well, with Factor, you can treat yourself to restaurant quality meals that feature premium ingredients, filet mignon, shrimp, blackened salmon. It's all there. Plus, if you're like me, you don't want to spend a lot of time in the kitchen. So keep kitchen time to a minimum. Factor meals are ready in 2 minutes. No shopping, prepping, cooking, or cleaning up. That's what we call effortless support for our lifestyle. Head to factormeals.com/myworld50 and use code myworld50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off the next month. That's code myworld50, myworld50 at factormeals.com/myworld50. And you're going to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. We thank our friends over at Factor Meals, and we hope you check them out.
So let's briefly discuss the Johnny Ace thing. When he sort of
John Laurinaitis.
Yeah, when he
John Laurinaitis, don't call him Johnny Ace.
Okay, sorry.
Johnny Ace doesn't work here. You ever heard that line?
No, I haven't heard that. Is that what he says?
In current employer, Johnny Ace does not work here.
Okay. Mr. Laurinaitis,
there you go.
when he drops that hint that, hey, something might be up or happening, how does that strike you?
As far as ownership?
Yeah.
I could not read like, okay, so new company coming in, who's going and who's staying? It's the easiest way for me to say it, that not everybody, things were about to change. Where was I going to fall in? But always, maybe the delusional optimistic, always had really a high level of confidence in my ability. I felt I could work with anybody, heel or babyface, opening match to main event. Where were the chips going to fall? But I also knew my deal was not going to choke anybody out. And so I felt confident that I would fit into that. Just like I told Bill Bush, yeah, I'll get on board. I'm going to earn my way to the top. Watch me. And that was sort of my vibe, that wasn't exactly sure where it was going, but give me an opportunity and I'll put on my work boots and go to work and let the chips fall where they may.
So next up, after your DDP match, we're starting to build towards the final WCW pay-per-view, which is Greed. And you get to work with Dusty Rhodes. and Ric Flair. As a kid who grew up in the wrestling business and understanding now, I guess with the benefit of context and hindsight, we know this is about to be the last WCW pay-per-view. And you go way back to the beginning of when this whole crazy run happened with Jim Crockett Promotions. It was a Flair and a Rhodes who really got this thing lit on fire. And now it's coming to a close on pay-per-view with them. It's kind of poetic in hindsight. And Rick's not teaming with his son, where Dusty is teaming with his son. He's teaming with Jeff Jarrett. How did you find yourself in this spot? And was the fan in you tickled like, dude, can you believe this? I grew up with these guys on TV and now here I am.
I've never believed in coincidences, only convergences. But yes, hindsight's 20/20 today, but I can remember living in the moment, thinking to myself, now again, I'd worked with Scott Steiner and Sid and Joe and the San Francisco match and the multiple Stings. Me and Sting at Halloween Havoc the prior year, we could have had just a knockdown drag out, and we had a really good match, but we ended up having 50 Stings in the ring. So all the ad nauseum layers, so to speak. But to get this opportunity, I knew then, because me and Dustin worked for WCCW, worked for my dad, and basically broke in back in '88. So that's how far back me and Dustin went. And having the opportunity, like you said, 605 Saturday nights, and knowing the history, and in the Memphis days when the Great American Bash toured, that was on top. It's on some shape, form, or fashion, and we're running the Mid-South Coliseum. So now fast forward to Greed, and I get the luxury of being in the ring with the two legends that we got to do showbiz, and some people, and Bruce would probably refer to it, got to do that Memphis wrestling. But here we are. We're going to walk and talk. We're going to entertain. Me and Dustin will be the workhorses, so to speak, and take all the bumps. And me and Dustin, I guarantee we'd have the same conversation today as we did 20 years ago. Look, we're going to do all the bumps, let the two showmen do their stuff. And I couldn't wait to feed for the elbow and just do that match, be a part of that. I was excited for it, and knowing that the direction we were going, and, at that time, Flair would come to the ring in slacks, and his heart wasn't, so to speak, completely into it. He was frustrated by all the above, and Dusty was frustrated with all the above. But it's like we sort of came together, and okay, let's go have fun.
How fun was it to dress up as a quote unquote fat Dusty Rhodes with a bucket of chicken here in Huntsville?
Your hometown. I can remember the spot. And when I went back and did episode 1 of TNA, the very first pay-per-view, I took a couple of people and said, this is where I stood and learned my Dusty Rhodes impersonation. Ed Ferrara took me aside, because when I got to TV, they told me a couple of days before, you're going to do this. And I said, I don't do a Dusty impersonation. I just don't. I don't want to do it. No, you can do it. You can do it. They said, look, even if you screw up, I'm like, I can't. Too many people do too good a Dusty Rhodes impersonations. It's going to be bad TV. No. I said, I'm just telling you guys. It's not saying I don't want to do it. It's going to be bad TV. No. And Ed goes, you let me work with you? He said, I'll teach you how to enunciate a Dusty Rhodes promo. And I go, okay. Interesting. He says, yes, I will phonetically spell out these words for you, and we'll go over it. And he said, Jeff, you got a great memory. The promo will be easy for you. You'll get into the character. I know you can do the walk. I'll teach you how to say these words. I wish I would have recorded it. So I said, okay, Ed. So we got out back, and Ed did it for me, and he did it again, and he did it again. And then phonetically, if you will. I mean, he literally phonetically tied together the promo, and we started doing it. And I knew sort of the light bulb went off, and he said, all right, let's just give it a dry run. And I wish I had that sheet, that script, but I said, all right, let's go. And I just sort of in my mind, 3, 2, and I started that promo, and I got 2 lines through it. And when I saw Ed start laughing, and not laughing at me, but laughing with me, I like, okay, I can do this.
And of course, we're building towards a kiss my ass match.
You didn't like the Dusty Rhodes impersonation with the bucket of chicken?
No, it's fun. You know, it's just weird when you think about it in context. Here's Ric Flair in a fucking Hawaiian shirt.
Yes.
Here you are in a fat man suit with a bucket of chicken doing a Dusty Rhodes promo. And believe it or not, this is how we're building to the only ever Ric Flair Dusty Rhodes pay-per-view match. Sure, you could have seen them on closed circuit back in the day, but pay-per-view didn't exist. So you were in the middle of the only Ric Flair Dusty Rhodes pay-per-view match. How crazy is
I didn't know that to this day. That's the only pay-per-view match?
the only one they ever had.
Well, that's a whole nother episode in and of itself.
Let's talk about the silliness, and then we'll get into the day, right? Gainesville, Florida, the main event promo on the second to last Nitro. It's old Silver Dollar, a donkey. He's supposedly eating 300 burritos today, and it says Dusty's ass.
Where are you reading this?
And well, no, you remember you were there.
Oh gosh.
And you and Rick get your faces pushed into its ass. I guess I buried the lead here. Dusty Rhodes rubs his ass in your face. That's got to be on the career highlight reel, right?
Wait, was that on the build-up or at the pay-per-view?
That's the pay-per-view. When you lost, he had those red underwear. You remember.
So I joined the Dusty Rhodes Kiss My Ass Club, and not the Vince McMahon one. So there you go.
You got it.
That's a feather in my cap.
The main event of the final episode of Thunder, you're teaming with Scott Steiner to take on Dustin Rhodes. The episode was taped on March 19th in Gainesville, Florida. It's going to air on March 21st. And then just 2 days later, March 23rd, it's announced that World Championship Wrestling has been sold to the World Wrestling Federation. When and how did you hear the news? Because, you know, I assume, hey man, I'm working some pay-per-view main events. We have cut back on house shows, but I'm working main events, and then I'm working with DDP, who I think is the new boss's buddy. And oh, by the way, I'm coming off of working with Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes on pay-per-view, even if it was a silly gimmick match based on, you know, their abilities at the time. I mean, they're older fellows, but they got the biggest pops of the night. So I'm working with over guys. I got good programs. I'm near the top of the card, and now it's over. How'd you hear that news?
So did Gainesville, knew something was up, flew home on a Tuesday, talked to the office. That was that spring break. And if you remember the Nitros the prior years, it's a big deal, like a tentpole event for Nitro. And I can remember the office saying, hey, can you come early? When's this? When's that? Well, when do you need me? Well, we're not really sure when we need you. And I'm like, well, okay. Is it Thursday? Is it Friday? Well, we know Friday you got an appearance, but we think maybe Thursday. We're not sure who's going to show up. And again, during this time, I, you know, maybe rightly or wrongly, or maybe this is just through my eyes, I was somewhat viewed from the office perspective. Jeff will do it. Jeff doesn't mind. He'll show up. He'll do it. Also creatively, we need a good match. Put Jeff in there. We need this. He won't say no to this. Oh, wait, we're going to do a crossover segment. Thunder. Do Jeff. He'll hit his timing mark. You know, I'll say, and I pride myself on that to this day, dependable. If you can't depend on somebody, it doesn't care. It's really irrelevant. Going back to the Bronco Lubitsch conversation, if you're not dependable, it's everything else goes out the window. So I say that I said, don't worry. I'll get on a flight Wednesday afternoon. And I flew into Destin because all the flights were sold out, spring break, that time of year, all that. Got in the rental car and drove over to Panama City, checked in. And so Thursday, you know, you just hearing different things, but you know, nobody could really say exactly what was going to happen. But I knew that that's when some contracts really started boiling up. Not really with me, but with other guys like, okay, this thing's really selling. How are they going to basically, who's the crew and who's not going to be the crew and what's the middle? And, you know, I knew my contract and who it was with and my attorney and, okay, what's going to happen? You just think about your payday this week. But I did not know when I boarded the plane. To my best recollection, I'm positive I did. I didn't know that Vince had bought it when I left Nashville on that Wednesday, got down there and, you know, connecting with people on Thursday and the appearances and that kind of stuff.
So let's talk about that. You said connecting with people. There's been lots of names thrown around, people who showed up to this last Nitro, including your old pal Road Dogg. He's no longer with the WWF. He's backstage at this last Nitro. I know y'all were thick as thieves once upon a time. Were you still friendly with Brian in this era?
At Nitro, he found out, and that was in our BS days, before sobriety days. He came over on the Saturday to hang out at Club La Vila.
Yeah.
Ever been there, Conrad?
I have. Yes, sir. It's the first time I ever saw cocaine in real life. I thought it was something that was just in the movies, and someone tried to sell me cocaine, and I'm fat. My heart's going fast enough, so I didn't need that. I took a pass. But I'm a kid from Gunnersville, Alabama. I thought that was something in the movies. I didn't know that was real life. And that was my last trip to Club La Vila. I was a square. I had to get out of there.
There you go. Smart man. Raised well. Thanks, Deb. So anyway, Brian came over to visit me and we chatted, but not a lot about the business. Like, what the hell's going on? I'm like, dude, I have no idea, like, really what's going on. But he wasn't working for them at the time. And so we just didn't know. He came over. It's good to see him. Now, me and Brian have never, I think your question was, we all friends? What was your question?
Yeah, we are friendly at the time, but the answer is yes.
We've never not been friendly.
Okay. So you're in Florida for a few days. Everybody, listen, everybody listening to this has heard the old phrase, telephone, telegram, tele-wrestler. So I'm sure the phones are lighting up.
Oh God.
I don't think text messaging was what it is now. It certainly existed, but I'm sure everybody's calling and voicemails and text messages and emails, and everybody wants to know what's going to happen, because all of a sudden, well, we just hit the iceberg. We're the Titanic and we don't know. Do we jump off the ship now? How do we find a soft spot to land? Is there panic amongst your wrestling comrades?
Guys like Shannon Moore, sort of the younger guys. I'm just trying to think, whatever name, it just popped in my brain. But sort of the younger guys, they were definitely coming to me because they knew I sort of knew what that machine looked like up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, I have no idea what this is going to look like. You may have a report there that may jar another memory, but the end all be all important question was, what does Nitro and Thunder look like moving forward? Like what is the answer to those kind of questions of all ongoing content creation?
So that weekend, you didn't know those shows were canceled yet. You assumed Vince owns them, but now Vince is going to run Nitro and Thunder.
It was up in the air, but yes. But again, I'm going back to, I could not imagine 12-year-old Jeff, 11-year-old Jeff, TBS 605, add Thunder, add Nitro, but still TBS had wrestling. Andy Griffith, Atlanta Braves, and professional wrestling. I couldn't fathom a Turner without wrestling.
Do you remember there being anyone in particular, and you said you just named Shannon Moore just off the top of your head, were there guys like Rick Steiner or someone else who says, well, that's it, because I ain't going back to work there. I've made my money. I'm going to go, as JR would say, learn a new hold, but I'm going to close the chapter on wrestling in my life. Do you remember anybody in the locker room having that sort of attitude, whether it was wound up shaking out to be the case or not? Do you remember somebody thinking that and saying it out loud?
No, no one saying that out loud. I don't think they would have. Maybe that's my brain thing. I damn sure don't think they would have said it around me. I think everybody was walking on wait and see, pins and needles. Oh boy, very, very, closed lip, poker face.
They're waiting on the other shoe to drop. How's this going to look?
Yeah, how's this going to look? As we get into it, I can remember the day of that Monday, the vibe backstage, not from the wrestlers, and we can get into that too, but from the production, the props, who I'd become very friends with, marketing and production, and I mean Keith Mitchell and the folks that and I don't know if now's the time, but that vibe of people that weren't on camera, I can remember their tone. the heaviness was there.
Well, and it's fun that we're talking about that because a few weeks ago, or maybe months ago at this point, somebody tweeted out that WCW recently had a reunion of sorts. Not the people we saw on camera every week, but the people who worked in the office. Because when WCW went down, a lot of really good, hardworking people who helped make the magic that we all loved, but were never in front of the camera, they lost their jobs. And they were their own little family because, they'd worked together forever and ever. And everyone listening to that has, I shouldn't say everyone, a lot of people listening to this have their own work family. Lord knows I do. And so you get used to seeing those people oftentimes more often than you see your actual family, and you spend more time with them, certainly. So when that thing goes down, there's more to the story than just, the Buff Bagwells and the Lex Lugers and the Jeff Jarretts. There's the people who had been punching the clock and doing their job every single day for years and years and years. And they weren't big TV stars and they lost their gig. That's a sad deal.
Huge. And because I had the great perspective to not only with my family's promotion, but working for Vince. At the end of the day, you didn't even have to give it a half a heartbeat on where can we go get the answer. At WCW, a lot of guys you just referenced, they succeeded in spite of the corporate environment, in spite of all these challenges, in spite of trying to appearance that they just hang up or wouldn't answer or not show up or be an hour late. So in challenging times, when you do have that nucleus of people, whether, Moses was a carpenter or not, he was a production, and the cameraman, Jackie Crockett, and just all the different props, and the Ellis was there. You name it. There was one big family that in a lot of ways, I don't want to say is us versus them because it was office versus talent, but they succeeded and had fun and lived life in spite of very challenging times. And we flew down to Club La Vila and Panama City Beach with a job. We're going home without one. It was really cut and dried. And those guys, cameramen, guess what? They've got cameramen in Stanford. Oh, we run lights. Oh, they've got lights. And, they knew they were out of a job. There was nothing was up for discussion.
The show was not actually at Club La Vila, but you guys were still hanging out at Club La Vila.
I'm messing with you. Yes. What was the name of the hotel it was at?
I don't remember.
Okay.
Here's the thing though. I really wanted to circle down on the way you felt personally. So, you had seen the Dallas territory die. You had seen the Memphis territory die, and you had walked out on Vince McMahon under difficult circumstances. We talked about it last week. We know at this point, ECW has circled the drain. They ran their last pay-per-view in January. So at this point, realistically, you've got to be thinking, I've got to go work for Vince, or I've got to go to Japan, or I've got to do what my dad did and start his own territory. But some of that may have been a little easier because, and I don't know, I'm asking here for the first time. Did you have a WCW contract or did you have a Turner contract? Because if you had one of those big money Turner contracts, as we all famously know that Sting and Goldberg and Kevin Nash and all those guys had, even if this thing goes down, I'm getting paid for a while. Now, you just said that wasn't exactly your thinking. You were thinking he's going to keep Nitro going and he's going to keep Thunder going. But did you also think, well, even if he doesn't, I've got a contract, I'm going to be fine income wise?
I can assure you, I called my attorney at the time, was Atlanta based. Well, he is now too, but it's a different attorney. You can assure you that I made the call. Now, I just want to be crystal clear. Yes, Jeff, you're going to get paid through, I think it was November, because it took a bit, because I left in October. My contract, even back to 93, was always rolled over sometime in October. I think because I came and it took maybe 6, 8, maybe, I don't know, 10 weeks. I knew I was getting paid at least basically through the end of the year. And that was the reality. I was not going to miss a paycheck through the end of the year. So that definitely gave me comfort.
So you make the jump in October of 99. It took a few weeks to get your deal done. We'll call it the end of November. And it was a 2-year deal. So if you execute it in late November 99, it'll be late November 01 before the check stopped coming.
Yes. And that gave me definitely, I mean, it gave me comfort without question.
So as we mentioned, it's the Panama City Nitro. We're calling it the Night of Champions.
Yeah, this is coming off from 93 to 01, basically working every week. I'd been a quote unquote workhorse for 8 or 9 years. So for a summer coming up and I live on the water, Conrad,
not a bad day.
I was going to say, okay, I'm kind of looking, I'm going to at least have some time.
And you had at least had a little bit of a lighter schedule, because even in that era, towards the end of WCW, they were taping Nitro and Thunder on the same night, and they had largely cut out house shows. So you're still doing some travel, but it's not the breakneck pace you had been years prior. And now, to your point, you get to rest up, you get to heal up. There's no such thing as a wrestler who's working with no injuries. Everybody's got a little something they're nursing all the time. So now, hey, I can hang out with my wife, who's hopefully coming out of the other side of a real challenging situation, and we'll float around Old Hickory for a little bit.
And a brand new jet ski. True. Yeah, and it was springtime anyway. I do remember saying, I'm going to get to at least relax. But I didn't really give it, honestly, I didn't think that far down the like what ifs. Again, I'm still going to go back up until it really became a reality that, wow, TBS and TNT don't have wrestling anymore. I just, that to this day, Jamie Kellner and connecting the dots, just can't put my finger on it. But
yeah,
little something dirty in the woodpile there.
Fraternity Brothers, maybe?
I don't know.
Yeah. Read the Nitro book, boys and girls. Hey, let's talk about that last Nitro. We know that deal goes down just a few days beforehand. So the WWF is now in control of the territory. Had that deal not closed, do you know what your creative would have been on that last Nitro?
No. Oh, God. Conrad.
Well, no, listen, I'm just saying, in this time, I know there's chaos, but I also know that you were plugged in. So you knew, these are the guys who are laying out creative. Tell us a little bit about who was handling creative in that era.
You would have to refresh my memory, but I know it was Harry Taylor and Bill Banks and Jeremy Borash, and I think Disco actually had a little bit in there. And the names that were woven in and out, I just say over the last calendar year, go from Bob Mole to Aaron Blitzstein, who I just got to work with 2 years ago in WWE. But it was a real, just an evolving who's sitting in on the creative this week. I can remember, okay, so as a talent, which I was strictly just a talent those days, I can remember packing my bags, Conrad, every week, and I would have 2 or 3 tights, because you never know, am I going to need whatever, 2 or 3 pair of tights, 2 or 3 sets of street clothes. I would throw in maybe a street fight stuff, because props would go out and get stuff, but I always like to have my own stuff. I would overpack. You'll get to know me. But I mean, I literally would carry so much, because we didn't know what we were going to have. Even if they told it to us over the phone, even if a Russo or Ferrar,
it could change.
Oh, it would change. So I had no idea going into that last Nitro. If I was doing anything, it wouldn't have surprised me if I had been opening match or closing match or not at all.
It's just fascinating to me, because, I'm friendly enough with talent these days to know that they usually get a heads up ahead of time. Hey, here's what we're thinking. Maybe they'll take a look at a script. Maybe that'll just be a quick phone call, whatever. But in those days, you literally showed up and they handed you a sheet of paper and here's what it is. And you just hope, okay, everything's in my bag. I'll figure it out.
100%. That is what, when they handed that sheet, you go, okay, let me go off to the room. A couple of times on the Nitros, when I first got there, I can remember thinking, okay, this is what was told to me. Let's just hypothetically say on Thursday and Friday. Is it going to stick? Get there on Monday. Wow, it stuck. This is what we're doing. And then it changed 2 hours later. I mean, that's really the environment we worked in.
Chat me up about the night before. You know, a lot of times guys go out and raise hell after the show. We're going to talk about that. But did you have, you know, sort of a one last family reunion with a lot of guys the night before? What was the night before Nitro like?
I want to say, because I had an appearance on the Saturday afternoon, saw Brian Road Dogg Saturday night. On Sunday, I think this is crazy recall. I think I waited. We hung out at the beach and did whatever. I think I waited that day and worked out maybe as the sun went down or late in the evening, and I went to bed. I don't remember any Last Supper.
Okay. The next day you show up to the building. These days, I think call time is like, I don't know, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, something like that. In this last Nitro, are people just showing up whenever they want, or do they think, hey, I need to show up early in case somebody else shows up? Or do you?
I remember I was always a guy that got there on time. You got to go back over the last 24 months. There were a time that they were fining folks for being late, and the check-in system, and got an initial, and, you know, this and all that kind of stuff. I got there on time, threw my bags, and usually went to catering and hung out. The very run-of-the-mill day was what, you know, let's see what happens. I can tell you I'll call it an understated, somewhat buzz. Like, okay, here we are. We've heard about it for 72 hours. What's really going to happen today?
This episode is sponsored by Blue Chew. Look, Jeff got fired and had the summer of no worries. If you want to get fired up and have the summer of no worries yourself, try our friends at Blue Chew. You can be hard as the summer day is long, and then get yourself a Blue Chew and bring the summer heat, baby. Blue Chew is a unique online service that delivers the same active ingredients as Viagra, Cialis, and Levitra, but at a fraction of the cost and in a chewable form. You'll get your stroke as well. The process is simple. Sign up at BlueChew.com, consult with one of their licensed medical providers, and once you've approved, you will receive your prescription within days. Blue Chew tablets, hey, made in America, baby, right here on the 4th of July holiday time. They are prepared and shipped directly to your door. And the best part, it's all done online. That means no visits to the doctor's office, no awkward conversations, no waiting in line at the pharmacy, worried if somebody's going to see you. It's all going down online. You can take them anytime, day or night, so you can plan ahead or be ready whenever an opportunity arises. Maybe it's Raw. Maybe it's SmackDown. Whatever your case may be, maybe it's a little Rampage, my friend. It's all going down with our friends at Blue Chew. You may be asking, does it work? Do you think you need it? Well, try it free for a month and see. You're going to love it. You could be missing out on the best sex of your life. They say there's nothing sexier than confidence, and Blue Chew can help give you the confidence where it counts. Blue Chew wants to help you have better sex in your world. Discover your options at BlueChew.com. And, of course, we got a special deal for you. Try Blue Chew free when you use our promo code MyWorld at checkout. Just pay $5 shipping. That's BlueChew.com, promo code MyWorld, and you're going to get your first month free. Visit BlueChew.com for more details and important safety information. And we thank Blue Chew for sponsoring our My World podcast.
So let's talk about the day, man. You're sitting there in catering, you're hanging out, and I'll be damned, Shane McMahon, Gerald Briscoe, and Bruce Pritchard walk in. Tell me about it.
The first person that I believe I saw was Duncan Leslie. And so the people who don't know who Duncan Leslie is, let's just call him the Grand Poobah production.
Okay.
That I had known. And I think he was the first one I saw, and I'm like, interesting day. Yeah, very interesting day. And at that time, the somberness of production folks had set in, and I'm like, man, you could just tell the vibe was different. But it was good to catch up with Duncan. But just, you know, walking around backstage, Shane was very nice, cordial. Bruce was, hey, Jeff. I knew they had their work hat on, and I could imagine they probably weren't real sure on how things were going to be taken, what was going to be said, maybe what not was going to be said, how things were going to be cooperated. And I just remember it was like, this is interesting. This is really interesting. Bruce is here.
And do you have a conversation with those guys? Do they have a big meeting with everybody? Just take me through your experience with the WWF personnel.
I've read about that over the years. Yes. I mean, I don't remember any specifics about the big team meeting. I just no recall. I can remember Bob Ryder, like he doesn't use the word hypothetical didn't use, God rest his soul, didn't use the word hypothetical, but he's like, yeah, can you imagine this? And how's the, just a lot of what ifs and questions. But again, there wasn't a lot going on. And as a talent, I kept remembering like, who's doing what? And, there's no, on the wall, here's the card for the night. Here's this for the night. Okay. So now no Shane and Bruce, obviously, with Bruce background, writing TV or producing or whatever it is, he's the one that's obviously driving the ship here. Or is he? Is it going to be one of those things that whatever Terry Taylor and Terry Taylor just keeps coming to my mind that he was always, because me and him go back to him and my father's relationship, but like who's wrestling who and how are we doing this? Just sort of the nuts and bolts is what I was trying to cut through. But I don't remember any grand speech or what was said or what wasn't said. Not a lot of meat on that bone.
So they come to you at some point and say, okay, we need you to get all your shit on and we want to see you pulling your guitar out of a guitar case.
Yeah.
And of course it's got, whatever it's got written on it, slap nuts or whatever. Do they explain why you're doing that or why they're having you film that?
We're going to shoot a pre-tape with you, Jeff. Can you get dressed? And I'm like, am I wrestling, not wrestling? And look, I don't remember this jersey because I had on. And I'm like, hey, Bruce, is this cool? Yeah, it's great. That's fine. I said, yeah, I think it's more appropriate what we're doing here, what we're going to do here. I'm like, okay, we're shooting a pre-tape. Great.
So we don't see the full thing. We do see you with the case on the monitor, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But did you turn around and cut a promo and they just edited it out?
No.
Or it was just you unpacking the guitar?
That's it.
Well, here's a silly question, but I want to know all the granular detail. Did you travel with that guitar? Or is that on the props truck?
That is a Ellis Edwards special. No. And there is because during that day, the production and specifically the two, the props truck, and I could just call it the scenic and all that kind of stuff. That's where they, at those times they had, I don't know, 6, 8, 10 guitars. And a guy asked me, hey, do you want any guitars? I'm like, do you want any of these guitars? And I'm like, are you giving them to me? Because they were really expensive guitars, and props used to sort of like, oh my God, it costs this. Anyway, I'm like, sure. And I said, you may just take them with me? He goes, well, we'll ship some. I said, no, let me take it. So I remember telling them to tape it up and all that kind of stuff. So the shorter answer is no, I didn't travel with that. That was a prop guitar.
But that day you left with 5 or 6?
6.
That's true. Did you keep any of them?
There's one on my wall right there. If you walk into my office, Conrad, right to the right, that's one. I've used a couple through the years. Then at the very last minute, I don't know, I've got one. But no, I've got 2 left.
Charity auction coming your way. Hey, so let's talk a little bit about the promo. Bruce told a famous story on Something to Wrestle that he's watching the show on a monitor, and apparently a lot of the quote unquote boys were doing the same. And he somehow winds up watching the scene with Vince McMahon that starts Monday Night Raw with you. Can you sort of set the stage?
So this promo open Raw?
Yeah. And you know what? Let's play it right now. Here we go. Here it is.
Well, now here's the WWF, and here's WCW. Well, there's Jeff Jarrett, and here we have the owner of the World Wrestling Federation, and now the owner of WCW. That's right. Vince McMahon, I have purchased, I own my own competition. And tonight I have the ability to address WWF fans as to what this means. I have the ability to address WCW stars as to what this means to them. And yes, I have the ability to address WCW fans as to what this actually means to them as well. Tonight, at the right time, there'll be a special simulcast. And let me just say that tonight, for sure, one man will make history. And that's me, Vince McMahon. Now, as far as the Jeff Jarretts of the world are concerned, you know how Jeff spells his name? That's Jeff. Well, you know what? I would suspect that we'd spell it a different way after tonight. That would be capital G, double O, double N, double E. Gone.
That's how Raw started. Top 5 most important Raws in the history of professional wrestling. Maybe one of the most important shows in the history of professional wrestling. And it starts with the Overlord, the most powerful man in wrestling, ribbing the way you spell your name and publicly firing you. Boy, you just got history coming and going, don't you?
Conrad, I had a flashback. Put this on and really think through this. 1986 was my first match.
Yep.
Before that, Kaufman, David Letterman show, Jackie Fargo, Jerry Lawler, all the folks coming through, my vision of the business, my thoughts on the business, and fast forward up, I forgot that open Raw. I had in my mind, and I don't know if people know how you make this chicken shit turn into chicken salad, that you have researchers, and it's a whole team at Ad Free and the guys, but to really drill down into it. But when I knew we were doing this topic, and this is where it comes to, but if you were to hear that back as a 30-something-year-old in my, okay, we'll call it ego. It takes the ego to go around this is. I, for a thought, and maybe carried that with me, Vince is going to shoot an angle with me.
Oh, okay.
It's all about money. When I heard that he went through all this, who did he pick out?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, who did he pick when you really drill it down? He can't fire me because I'm not hired. I'm getting paid through November, October, November, December, whatever it is. But no, who's he got a working relationship that drew money? And when I left in 99 was the hottest heel on the card. That's arguable sake, but a red hot heel. He's a business guy. Who can he take from this roster that he knows will do the job in spite of any circumstances, whether good, bad, or indifferent? My last night in 95, I did the job to Sean. I could have walked out beforehand, did the job to Sean, and left. China, did the job to China, and left. Who's willing to do business? He picked me to fire me. We're doing an angle.
Wow. I think from the outside, we all thought, oh, remember when he held up Vince? This is Vince's receipt. And your brain, as you said, ego comes into it, goes to, no, he knows I'll do business. I'm going to bitch about my payoff. Maybe I'm not going to like my creative, maybe, but I'll do what he wants. I'll put Sean over. You can cover me in flour. That's fine. But the public firing. So take me to that moment. Bruce says, y'all are watching together. Do you remember seeing it on the monitor? Was Bruce nearby? What's your reaction?
I don't remember Bruce, but I'm not to say that. Look, me and Bruce have always, and it goes with me and Tom, his brother, hit it off from day one. And I can't tell you how many miles that I rode with Dr. Tom. And Tom had been in the business, I don't know, 5-7 years longer than me. And Tom was close enough to my age. He wasn't, quote unquote, an old timer, but was very seasoned. And Tom, like he is today, he's part of the Ad Free family, but he's very giving of his knowledge. And he had a way, and maybe some stories we can't tell on this podcast, but me and Tom had it was unique because Tom would cut through the BS. Hey, Jeff, that sucked. Now, what about this way? So Tom critiqued my in-ring work. So I say all that. Me and Tom had a really tight relationship. He also knew that me and my dad didn't have such a great relationship. I also knew that him and Bruce weren't, oh, yeah, he's my brother. But guess what? Our relationship, and they're just two of, I don't know how many Pritchard brothers are there? 5, I think.
Yeah, there's a bunch.
Yeah. So our family connection, we ran up the roads together. Tom is a heel, me as a babyface. Tom, I can remember coming through the dressing rooms a lot of nights going, damn, that was a hell of a match. And he was all off Tom's psychology. He knew what he was doing. So anyway, me and Tom had a good relationship. Fast forward to me and Bruce is doing the vignettes, working together. Bruce was a supporter of me working against Scott Hall. I knew that. I absolutely knew that Bruce really liked the Razor Double J storyline. So now I'm not going to get sidetracked, Conrad, and do all that. But coming fast forward, here comes Bruce. Bruce, we had a relationship. I knew he wasn't he was pissed off that I walked out in Nashville that night, like really mad at me. And also knew coming back, he wasn't the greatest of fan of me coming back in the fold. But Russo was also writing, and I knew everybody had their own individual ups and downs. And, at that time, Russo and Ferraro were lead writers. But anyway, get to Panama City. Again, unless you're in the industry, but the boys will be the boys will be the boys. And at the end of the day, we're all going to cross paths again. Bruce grew up in the wrestling business in Houston. I grew up in Tennessee. So I and maybe wrongly, maybe this is completely inaccurate. Maybe Bruce really enjoyed it for the moment, but I didn't take it anything slight. I don't remember him standing next to me. But as I heard that promo just 5 minutes ago, it came back in my mind. I'm going, he started Raw with Jeff. He started Raw with Jeff. Where are we going with this? People came up and asked me this, namely Bob Ryder.
Not just started Raw, started the Raw. I mean, for years, fans had, and my gosh, look how much money the quote unquote after mags made off of the fantasy booking of what if The Undertaker, wrestled the Giant? What if, The Undertaker wrestled Sting?
Goldberg, Austin was the dream match of all dream match when they were red hot.
So all of that, even going back to before Hogan came over, it was Hogan and Flair who would win. They had done this for decades. And now this is the show where it's finally, hey, we're announcing it can happen. I own them both. And instead of starting off with teasing, boy, now we've got the dream matches coming, everybody, nope, I'm going to fire that motherfucker. That's the way we read it, right? Like,
see, and I can't put myself in your shoes.
Yeah.
In this time frame, because I was so ingrained to On the Grind, Nitro, Raw, Thunder, in the TV moment, writing TV, being a part of good creative, being a part of bad creative, all that to go with it. And he starts Raw with Jeff.
Bruce says that he didn't tell you what the creative was, and you didn't know what the creative was. You watched on a monitor like everybody else. When you saw it, laughed, patted him on the back, and walked away. That sound about right?
And I can tell you, full transparency, and this is so liberating. And we text back and forth, but there's a little bit of cleansing in all this. And through the last 3.5, 4 years, I've had different moments of this. But I can assure you, going on inside of Jeff's head was, I'm going to give him the nervous kind of the golf clap pat. Hey,
yeah.
Walking away like, okay, he started with Raw. What does that really mean? Man, what are we doing next week? Where's Raw at next week? Am I on Raw next week? Am I on SmackDown? Wait, no. Jeff, you're getting too far ahead. Wait, okay. He wouldn't have put me. It's the old game in your mind. He wouldn't have put me on TV unless there were plans. Well, maybe not. Well, I'm getting paid. I'm not going to give that up. And why would he pay me this money when he wouldn't pay me this 2 years ago? And guess what? I'm going back to my Memphis roots. When you have a roster of, in those days at WCW, 100 guys or 80 guys or 60 guys, it's a big pile of mess regardless. Nobody, I can remember Hall, Nash, Hogan, Flair, Goldberg, whatever that, Booker, just the whole big roster. I do remember having this conversation with my dad, maybe not the week after, but the following couple of weeks. Nobody means nothing, Dad. If everybody goes over at once, it's complete dilution. It will not work. It just won't. How can you make anybody special if there's 30 new guys that show up? It just isn't going to work. So that night, though, we're staying on the night.
Hang on, time out. Did you say that because you had seen what happened with the UWF and the NWA before when Crockett bought out Watts?
It's okay. UWF, I always refer to it as Watts territory.
Yeah.
Yes. But if you also remember when Geigel and Kansas City went out of business, there's been an influx. It's just, when we came in to Dallas from USWA and Michael Hayes and Kevin Von Erich, hey, we need your help. Well, all of a sudden, my dad was like, no, wait a minute. Eric Embry's there. We don't need to send everybody at once. And Cactus Jack and Gary Young and, just, I guess, cumulative effect of looking at my entire rearview mirror, so to speak.
People had tried it and it didn't work.
It doesn't work. I mean, period. It just doesn't. It's
hard enough to get one guy over. You can't get 30 over.
Bingo.
So anyway, let's get back to the night. So you're thinking all of that, I'm not going to give this money up. He wouldn't pay me that before, blah, blah, blah. You're walking away after the nervous laugh. Do you just go pack your shit and leave the building, or do you hang around?
There's a picture that floats around, and it's the last Nitro. And I can remember there was sort of a kinship between me and Conan and Disco Inferno and Jeremy Borash and Bob Ryder. We did this show, or not we, but Bob and Jeremy did the show WCW Live. And me and Conan and Disco, all at different angles, but we always loved that instantaneous feedback. And that WCW call-in show, although we had some of the same callers, but we got immediate feedback. And I had come to, me and Bob Ryder's friendship had really blossomed out of that, and me and Jeremy Borash as well. Jeremy, excuse me, we'll go on to discuss that, but how integral a part of it is, Jeremy's got a skill set. He's a people person. His background is a DJ. He's into tech at an early adopter of that. That relationship of us five, and it's cool that photo was taken, but I can remember going in there. I didn't really have much to pack in my bag, and I knew I wasn't flying out to the next day. And I knew that I was one of those guys that some people would rush back to the hotel bar, night after night after Nitro. And maybe Scott Hall told me this, what are you in a rush for? It's going to be there till about 3 a.m. So just hanging out in WCW Live and having those conversations, and took care of, there was props, and another guy was like, give me an address. I was getting stuff shipped to my house. That's the old promoter mentality. But
so are you going around saying goodbye to everybody?
I can't say that other than some production folks that I went up and thanked them. I did. I really, because during that time, again, with the creative and not knowing what we were going to do, and a lot of those folks really, I don't like to say it, it's the truth. They really bent over backwards for me.
Yeah.
From a talent standpoint, but also gave back. They knew that I appreciated it. So I can remember going to specifics, production folks, and just say, hey, man, I appreciate it. Look, AOL Time Warner is a big organization. Look, you're going to land on your feet. This is really interesting. Things can change. But there was a real sense of, I don't want to hear that. So I just sort of said my goodbyes. As far as the boys and talent, it's like, I mean, even when I was working in Dallas, I'd go by this WCW show. The boys will be the boys. There was no need in telling them so long. I didn't look at it that way. Look, we're in the industry, period. I still stayed in contact with WWF talent. To this day, I've got friends in every organization around the world, from Australia to the UK. I mean, it's a kinship, so to speak, that always exists.
So you go back to the hotel bar, you're hanging out with the guys. What are the quote unquote boys saying to you about the promo? Are they wondering the same thing you did? Like, hey, does this mean you're working an angle with Vince? Or are they coming up saying, oh, sorry, man?
Both. I mean, it's a lot of it is coming back. They were like, what's that mean? I'm like, hell, guys, I didn't write the damn thing. But I don't know. But I said, on the one hand, but I mean, it's TV. Guys, it's fictitious. period. It is truly fictional. It's not going to happen, to my knowledge, anything past tonight unless they contact me. Well, what's your contract say? Well, guys, I'm getting paid just like everybody else is around here. And, some of those guys, oh God, I wish I'd have done the research on this, but maybe it'll come up down the road. But there were a couple of guys that had a month left or 2 months left, or it was over that night. They weren't happy. Yeah. But it's not like we were pointing fingers at them, but it's just the timing of everything. I think some people had more than a year on them too.
So here's my question. Two follow-up questions to all this. Did your dad watch it? Did you call your dad that night? Do you talk to your dad about it the next week? When or what does he say about what he saw?
We had a conversation, I want to say a month, maybe too far out, but he asked me specifically on my contract, what's the deal? And I'm like, look, I signed it. It's a 2-year deal, period. So I certainly didn't talk to him that night or the day after, maybe a couple of days after, but my relationship with my father, I don't want to say business was non-existent, but pretty damn close.
Talk to me about, and me and you are still feeling each other out. I mean, we've known each other for a while and we've been friendly, but I'm about to ask some sensitive stuff here, and I'm just feeling my way out here.
Here we go.
You got a wife at home who's battling cancer, and you just were publicly fired. How was she? Was she nervous? Was her family calling? Because maybe they're not as quote unquote smart to the business and they didn't take the same approach you did, or maybe it's an angle. Was there panic of, oh God, what are we going to do in your household?
So here's just to connect the little dots. She had rebounded, double mastectomy, got through that. We had a baby in 2000. Jacqueline was born in the year 2000. So we had a 6-month-old baby at home. So the cancer was in the rearview mirror, big time. But a new baby was right there.
Just as scary in some takes, in some respect. Because now it's not just I got to take care of me and Jill. Yeah.
And a house that I'd been in a year and a half, this house.
Yeah.
But again, maybe it was overconfidence, but I've also had a lot of peace and faith, but and I'll call it maybe confidence or overconfidence. I'll figure this thing out.
You're an optimist.
I'm very much an optimist. And also during that sabbatical in 95, when I left Vince that time, I went out and got my contractor's license, and my dad was building houses off my contractor's license. So whether it was in the business or out of the business, but let me just go back all the way to the roots. I knew, and to this day, you can figure out a way to make money out of this business if you really develop a product that people want to watch.
Yeah.
And if I had to go run shows, I mean, that was one of the things, or the thing that originally attracted me to Andrew McManus. Hey man, let's go run some shows.
We'll talk about that more in 2 weeks, but I am curious, you thought you were working an angle. How much time do you let go by before you expect a call, or you just give a call to either the office or Vince or Bruce and say, hey man, what are we doing? Or do you just not do that and quietly let the cash come into the mailbox?
I didn't let it quietly come in the mailbox. I just made sure it came in. But that was, I'll say, over the next 90 days when I got the opportunity to let my hair down and chill and enjoy life and that. But at the same time, going back to my learning and uprooting. And look, my dad and Jerry Lawler, they chased Austin Idol. They chased Handsome Jimmy Valiant. They chased Nick Bikewinkle. They chased different names and wanted them to come in. And you never got a phone call from Handsome Jimmy. Hey, Jerry, can I come make Memphis? Nope. It is Handsome Idol. Can you give me a couple of Mondays? No, you don't have to make Evansville. No. You just make Nashville, Louisville, and Memphis, the big shows. It's that promoter talent relationship. if they don't come calling, don't go. Just
Wow.
don't go. If you do, you're the proverbial
You're a doormat.
100%. Here it goes 100% again. Yes, look, I'm subconscious saying it, but no, that as time went on, and I'll say from the days and weeks, and then turns into months, and the McManus situation, and me and Jerry Borash that summer, because he lived in Nashville or lived in Atlanta, and he would drive up. We became more buddies, and on the technology side of things, and looking at different things. And again, I'm also watching TV, knowing, man, the WCW funk is not going anywhere close.
Before you talk about that, let me ask, because allegedly, and my timeline might not be exactly right here, but not too terribly long after WCW goes down. Of course, we should mention that public firing is on a Monday. 6 days later, they have the biggest pay-per-view of all time, WrestleMania 17. And they had some WCW talent in a skybox there.
Yep.
I know I feel like I know the answer. You didn't get an invite for that, right?
No.
The big thing I was getting,
put on my talent head. Who wants to be shot at a Mania watching?
No, bad call. Just based on what you said, I knew even if you got the invite, you weren't going. But allegedly, JR set up camp in a hotel, and one by one, with Johnny Ace's help, met with a ton of WCW personnel. So guys like Finley and a ton of others, he's meeting with face to face, and he's having conversations about what we will do, what we won't do, what we might do. And you haven't brought that up one time. Did you meet with JR in Atlanta?
No.
Were you invited to meet with JR in Atlanta?
What now?
Were you invited to meet with JR in Atlanta?
No.
Did you hear that everybody else was?
I heard that there were some folks, but I didn't really know individual contractual status with each guy. And I kind of thought that they had looked at pen to paper, and I'm not paying you what you're going to get. And
that's my next follow-up. Allegedly, they call guys like Diamond Dallas Page, like Goldberg, like Sting, like Kevin Nash, et cetera, and they say, listen, we would love to have you. We've got some big plans. We want to do XYZ, but in all candidness, we can't honor your existing contract. We would like to offer you, and a lot of the times it wound up being a number around 50%. So 50 cents on the dollar. So guys like Kevin Nash were faced with sit home and make 900 grand a year to do nothing. I'm just freestyling numbers. That's probably not exactly accurate. Or let's get back on the road and go make 500, bump around a little bit. And almost no one takes that deal. Some WCW deals, to your point, were coming up sooner than others. Some other guys realized, hey, this is an opportunity and I want to make the most of that. The two biggest who were successful in that were probably Booker T and, at least at first, DDP. DDP is another big name that just jumps right in there. Of course, we know DDP's WWE experience was probably what you were worried about, and Booker T became, one of the pillars of the deal. But it didn't look so bright at first. There's all that talk of what happened behind the scenes with Buff Bagwell and Hurricane and a water bottle and Buff's mom and JR, and so much of that is rumor and innuendo. But what we know for sure is in Tacoma, Booker T wrestled Buff Bagwell, and Arn Anderson was on commentary with Scott Hudson. And it was so poorly received, all the plans changed that very night. As soon as the show was over, all the creative folks met in Vince's hotel room, and they changed the entire plan. Did you watch that match in Tacoma? What was your thinking at the time?
I watched that match. You hadn't been, this is in my downstairs, but you hadn't been down there yet, Conrad. I watched it, and I can remember going, wow, that was rotten. That was rotten. And I thought to myself, as an in-ring performer, I love Buff. Go back a long ways with him. But unless you know how to work the Big Show style, you ain't going to get over. And Booker was super versatile, and me and him had a run of matches, and I'm not saying it but Booker, incredible talent before he got there, but there's a style that you had to work and knew how to work in the timing, and they didn't do it. And it just was a bad taste. And I just said, man, I don't think I can recall that I had this exact thought, but I'm just saying, I'm glad that I'm not a part of that. Because Vince, look, I'm looking at it through how Vince's wife, I knew Vince hated it. I had to have hated it.
It's a terrible analogy, but just humor me for a minute. It's almost as if we're in this big successful band, and for whatever reason, our guitar player goes down. He's sick. He needs to come off the road, something. So we've got a new guitar player who just tore it up with another band. But when he's on stage with us and we're in front of a big sold out show, he's a little off key. And that doesn't mean that he's not a great performer. Hell, we know his resume.
It's like
just tonight with our band, he's off key a little bit.
It's like take a member of the Wiggles and putting him on stage with Van Halen.
There you go.
Something wasn't real. It was, yes. It died. It died.
The Observer write-up about this night, March 26, 2001, from Dave says, Jarrett all night had no idea whether it was a work or a shoot when McMahon said he'd spell double J, double gone. Shane McMahon, however, told all the wrestlers they would be starting with a fresh slate. However, at the meeting, that definitely wasn't the case, and the company expressed no interest in anyone they felt would hurt the relatively harmonious locker room they've finally got with the WWF. So even if you weren't a subscriber to the Observer, I'm sure someone told you about this write-up, and it's almost inferred there, the relatively harmonious locker room they finally got. It feels like, for better or worse, you might be lumped in there with the rumor and innuendo is that at times Lex Luger and guys like that could be difficult to work with. Perhaps Scott Steiner would make that list. And we don't see them all just rush over to the company. Did you think, well, maybe that's it. Maybe they don't think I'm a fit in the locker room. Or did you think, since JR's holding these meetings in Atlanta and I didn't even get the invite, maybe he's still sore about 99.
I thought timing. The timing of any talent that you're going to do something with. Look, you can get hired and get a job, and hey, man, I'm going to send you around. I'm going to throw you some house show runs. You're going to be at the bottom of the card, get you some wins, get you some loses, but it's a dead end street. So, at that time, I'm willing to sit for a while. And I'm talking about the we'll call it the inside of 90 days of the last Nitro. I wasn't particularly worried about the cattle call of Jim Ross and seeing talent because I thought that was a money deal. I didn't have a complete accurate statement. Steiner was probably one. I don't remember specifics, but he lived down there, and Rick Steiner and Jim Ross had always been buddies. So, and Steiner and them didn't leave WWE on the best of terms, the Steiners. So just a sort of a hodgepodge of all of it that, and look, when you hear harmonious locker room, and I may be real jaded here, but harmonious locker rooms, I think that's somewhat of an oxymoron.
Yeah. You need people competing.
I was going to say, you have to.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you have cutthroats. There's no, look, you can have a cancerous locker room too, and that will kill business. But if you have a competitive and harmonious don't exactly go hand in hand. And I think to really get business going, you got to be super, super competitive.
We've often heard, and we even said it, I said it earlier on this show, that whoever's running talent relations, they're really in the heat position. They're the person who is the bad cop in the good cop, bad cop scenario. We've always heard that Vince doesn't really want to be the bad guy, but here he is on TV as a character. He's Mr. McMahon here, but on live TV, he's firing you. Now we know he's not really firing you. You're still getting your checks. You don't technically work for him, blah, blah, blah. How do you reconcile that?
You have to go back to episode 1, but the hold up. But the last interaction I had with Vince
was a hug,
a thank you. And an hour prior to that, he dropped a big fat check written out of Gun Arena. He authorized that, which he did not have to do. That's what I think somebody lose sight of, the true personal relationship. Vince could have easily he could have come up and said, hey, Jeff, that's a little stiff. Why don't we make this number half of what it was? And look, if we're going to do this, can I get you to stay tomorrow night on Nitro or on Raw and let China beat you again? Can we work out something different here? No, Vince said yes and yes and yes.
Can I just tell you, he loved it?
Love what?
He loved that you held him up.
Oh, I don't know about that.
I know he did. I'm not saying I asked him about it specifically, but I'm just saying it's in his personality. I've only had a handful of conversations with him, but
I got you.
It's in his personality that he likes promoters, for lack of a better word. He likes the negotiation, like, and he respects it. It's one of those deals where you treat people or you teach people how to treat you. And so when you're chasing them, hey man, can I please, as you said, or I sort of said, and you said 100%, they're going to treat you like a doormat. He liked that you dug your heels in and said, nope, double it.
Of course.
That.
Yes. And he didn't have to pay me.
I'm sure when JR I would be willing to bet when he walks back into Vince's office and he says word for word, I'm sure JR had some more colorful language to describe him. You won't believe what he's saying now, type of deal. I'm sure Vince took his glasses off. Pay that man. That's good shit. I just feel like he's just like, what are you going to do? Now, here's my question. As much as we say he liked it and he respected it and he knew that you would get it, and obviously you hold your dad in high regard, we're going to talk about that for the rest of this show. Not this show, but this podcast series. But you talked about the ego earlier. When you see that and you think, oh, maybe we're going to work an angle, and then the call never comes. Does it hurt your feelings a little bit that Vince maybe thinks, well, shit, this thing was hemorrhaging cash and Jeff was on top. Jeff ain't a draw. We don't have to have him. Did that cross your mind where it was like, damn it, he didn't have any confidence in me to draw, or he'd called me?
So from promoter to promoter, and I didn't think it at that time, but the players that I felt didn't want me around, and you can put, okay, let's say put Bruce in that equation, put JR in that equation,
Austin
in that equation. Who knows? Maybe a few others. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? I'll just say Vince has the ultimate responsibility. What's it saying? What's good for
what's best for business
is what's best for business. So if I knew, even at that stage of my career, not 20 years now as I'm sitting here today, but then that he's got to do what's best for business. And although he respects me as a talent and knows that I can work and talk and draw money, I've done it for him in the past, but also it's at his direction and in his booking. Hey, might not be the best time. Let's sit on this. Again, Vince is a long forward thinker. So maybe Jeff Double J doesn't need to come in this original WCW, because really he's a Double J character. I mean, Vince always looked at me as a double. Maybe he's not a part of this WCW run. And all that kind of weight. And look, again, Vince would bring a talent in those days and wouldn't try to draw money with you for a year later. Now, that's obviously there's different exceptions and different timing and all that, but Vince has got the patience of Job a lot of times with characters. So I don't say my feelings were hurt, but I damn sure knew, 60 days in, okay, it's not, but, and then again, the things start coming out. Goldberg is definitely not giving up his money. Scott and Kevin definitely not giving up their money. It's just not happening. I'm like, okay, so we've got a 2 or 3 year program here.
So let me ask, before you come to that realization that all these other guys aren't coming, there has to be part of you, because I know Jeff a little bit, enough to know that, by God, you're an overthinker. Do you think you were in your head a little bit about, boy, I wish I had that one back? Did you look back on your exchanges with the company whether it was the first or the second iteration, and have any regrets about the way it happened, thinking maybe I could have did that a little better. Maybe I could have did that a little differently. Or are you a guy who says no regrets? It is what it is.
The China situation, knowing how all that went down, knowing that JR had cut my pay, that was that cut me to the bone.
Yeah.
Real personal, obviously dealing with everything that is going on with my wife at home and sick, and Linda making the call and my pay cut and hey, we're going to keep you at this. And that was a bad taste. So I didn't, and to this day, really, I mean, what happened there happened. That's why I think I really got emotional last week off of that I got to put a button on that 2-year contract, that everything sort of trued up. It all worked out. Now go back to the Double J of 95. I wish I would have, look, as a 25, 26, 27-year-old man, I made a mistake. I did not over communicate. It's a lesson that I'll take to my grave. I did not over communicate with Vince and say, Vince, I think your idea sucks. I think we've got 2 songs, 3 songs, 4 songs. I think we're pulling the rug out for me and Road Dogg. If you would come out on live events and see our reaction, we're red hot. We are headed. This is a package that you can take to the moon. Yes, Brian Brian had only been wrestling a couple of years then. So his in-ring ability was always been there, but there was a lot of guests. I mean, we'd only been together 6 months. But the way I handled it, I didn't over communicate. I don't think Vince really understood. Boy, Jeff doesn't like this so much, so he left. So that did play in my mind during that time frame. They didn't trust me.
Well, I don't know how we can end the episode any better than that. But before we do, we've got some questions from social media. You know, as you guys know, I'm big on money and talking about money. Obviously, hey, it's Conrad, the mortgage guy. But
Conrad.com.
Yeah, saveaconrad.com. Roll Tide.
SaveWJ.com. That's another conversation. Keep moving.
We got to get one of those going. So I looked up the inflation calculator just to see. Oh. And your income in 2000, 539,000 would have been well over 800 grand in today's money. So pretty substantial little payday you had worked out for yourself. Let's get to some questions online. Adam wants to know, would you have been willing to rework your contract to have joined the invasion angle, or was there a sense that wasn't happening, which helped motivate Vince into firing you in that promo? So forget the second half of the question. If approached, would you have taken a pay cut to be in a prime spot on the invasion, or did you not have confidence in that idea?
I think I would have had as much as possible conversation, and I can tell you who it would have been with. Vince first, JR, and Bruce. And I would have probably even asked, hey, Bruce, probably not JR because JR was in the heat spot. Hey, Bruce, do you think you and Steve can have a conversation and just see where it goes? Because look, I learned the hard way. I didn't mean any harm by that opening promo, but I absolutely, it's never been about just the money,
right?
And knowing the upside and how hot the business was and how much I love it. Like I love it to this day, and I loved it then. Yeah, put me in the game and let's see where it takes us.
Let's do a few more here. This is an interesting one. Mike says, how devastating for the industry at large did you view Vince McMahon's purchase of WCW at the time?
So when you say at the time, why don't you elaborate for the?
Well, we know what it means now. It meant that.
Are you saying like that night or just the following?
2001. We'll just say, when you find out, hey, Vince bought it, and at the time we're thinking, well, maybe there's going to be a Nitro, maybe there's going to be a Thunder. Fast forward a few weeks, a few months, whatever you want to look at. We'll call it the summer of 01. We realize that shit ain't happening, and they're doing a half-assed invasion, and WCW is dead. There is no Nitro.
So I got a brother, Jason, 9 years younger than me. So at that, just think about he graduated high school in 95. So, he's out of college, just that area, age group of folks. And then just traveling around the country. Remember, I was on either Raw or Nitro for the last 7 or 8 years. Without a number 2, there was a huge, now I'm not talking TNA days, huge void in the marketplace, but there was a huge like, oh, man, the season's over. WWF is the Super Bowl champs. I wonder what's going to happen, because it was so ingrained of flipping channels. And did you see what happened over here? Did you see what happened? It became a part of the boys, the talent, what we're into. Oh my gosh. I'm texting, no matter what company, if I'm in WWF, I'm texting Kevin Nash. Hey, what'd y'all do? I mean, we lived it. We as talent, in my opinion, yes, it was the networks, USA versus TNT, and the executives and Billionaire Ted against Vince and all that. But at the end of the day, the competition between the boys on alternating brands, at the end of the day, that's the fruit of that competition. And it was over. It was over. And knowing that you're watching whatever at that time, 11 segments of Raw, and you don't get to see Hall, Nash, Goldberg, whatever the stars were on, so you tune in on Monday nights and you really just got to see half the stars.
2 more questions and we'll wrap things up here. And obviously from a performer standpoint, this had to cross your mind. Was there anybody on the other side that you saw and thought, man, I'd love to work with them? That comes from Brendan. Brendan wants to know if it would have worked out and you would have been a part of the invasion angle. Was there a talent that you thought, man, I could draw money with that guy, whoever it may be?
So Jericho, that's a good question you ask. He came to Y2J. He came in, and I didn't really get any interaction with him. And now I'm at WCW, and he's up there climbing the ladder quickly, all that. And he was with Rock and Austin, and he was a new talent. That was one. The Austin program I knew never going to happen. But I would have to look at a roster, but I can remember, because he was right in that mix, and his promos, he can talk. He could talk from day one. We had some interaction in '96 when I was in WCW. But that I'll call it, that story never, there was never, we never had, our paths never crossed creatively, so to speak.
One last one. This is a great question. Michael McClanahan, one of our adfreeshows.com members, he wants to know, at this point, did you consider leaving wrestling to pursue an alternative career?
No, that's a short answer. No. Japan in 2001 wasn't what it once was, but still there. Puerto Rico wasn't what it once was, but it was, Dutch was down there and on the rise up. I'd been offered money from Carlos, pretty big money for that time, to come down. I don't know if it's every 6 weeks or 8 weeks. So no, there was not a plan B for a career in Double J's brain.
Well, next week we're going to be back paying tribute to a great man. Unfortunately, it's that time of year where we all think about Owen Hart and the tragedy that happened when we lost him. And you were his tag team partner and a running buddy. And for years and years, the only piece of wrestling memorabilia that was up in your house is a picture of you and Owen together. And I'm looking forward to this next week. It'll be a little bit of a departure from holding up Vince and fired on national TV, but we're going to try to do our best to pay tribute to Owen Hart next week. What might we talk about, Jeff?
And I have been asked, I would say north of 80% of every interview I've done, once I've got out of talking of Mania or Halloween Havoc or Bound for Glory or whatever the big event I may be promoting, or Wrestle Kingdom 9, it was, hey, if we can go back in your history, give me your favorite match or give me your favorite opponent. Oh, can I ask you one last topic? Because people always would leave it till the end and say, can we talk about Owen Hart? And a lot of people would come at it from different angles. And can you tell me a rib, or can you tell me a favorite Owen match or an Owen story, or just a little bit of pieces here and there? Everybody has always danced around it. We weren't going to talk about May 23rd, 1999, but all the different, and I've always, and I will say, self-admittedly, it's come to be somewhat of a standard example, a standard answer, because I didn't want to go into it because sound bites and, headline, can I pick from this and pick from that? And I just never wanted to be a part of that fodder, so to speak. And so I always said, first thought that always comes to my mind, and I'm going to leave it at this. And it's something that I feel I'm respecting Martha and Oj and Athena and the entire Hart family. Most importantly, Owen, though, let's not talk about Owen the wrestler or Owen the prankster or Ripper or even Owen the father or the uncle or the brother. Let's talk about Owen the man. And I always make it very concise. I've never met a human being who had so much integrity inside or outside of this business than Owen. And he was a man's man with a tender heart, but a true friend. And you knew that every time you had a conversation with him.
We're going to talk about Owen next week. We'll be back in 2 weeks to talk about the idea and how it all came together for Jeff to form his own promotion. And it's not probably what you think. It is a little different. There's going to be some twists and turns. We'll do a series of shows about that. But next week, it's all about Owen Hart. And if you've got a question, the best way to interact with the show is to follow us on Twitter. It's at My World Podcast. I want to remind you that you get all these shows early and ad-free. In fact, the folks who are at adfreeshows.com got this show 6 days early. And we even have a bonus piece of content coming up later in May. We're going to talk about you breaking into business with your first match against Tony Falk, 1986 in Memphis.
Get out of here.
That's going to be fun. Yeah, why not, man? Let's go back to the beginning for adfreeshows.com.
Tony had more first matches, I think, Shawn Michaels, James Storm. I mean, Tony is maybe the most, I don't say this is getting too far out there, but in my eyes, through my 30, he's the most famous journeyman wrestler that I know of.
We're going to talk all about it over at adfreeshows.com. Jeff, is there anything else? Have we gotten it all? Have we uncovered it all? Is there anything left to discuss about you being fired on national TV here today?
I don't know how long this podcast has gone, this specific one. I've gotten some calls from folks and said on episode 1, damn, dude, 3 hours. I'll say this today. If you would have asked me how long we go, Conrad, do you know?
We're at 2 hours and 15 minutes right now.
Okay, if you would ask me 2 hours and 60 minutes ago, how long do you think this episode will go? I would have said under an hour.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is, and I'm putting you over, you may not realize this, but because the build up to the story, the deal was Vince fired me on national TV. I never looked at it as me being fired, ever, never. I thought, is he shooting an angle? And that's sort of the flashback that came to me, but where's this going to go? Because we're only as good as our last match or storyline or angle. And if he didn't want to hire me, I was going to get hired somewhere else. But the story behind the story behind the story is what makes your format so compelling. And I mean that.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I just think it's important to talk about and have these conversations, not in a radio format. And I'm not disparaging radio. Eric and I do one every Wednesday night at fortheheat.com at 9 p.m. Eastern. But I'm just saying those shows have hard breaks. Hey, you got a good 9-minute story you could tell, Jeff? Well, that's not what I want to do here. I want to have a good conversation about how you were really feeling and not think that these stories happen just in a vacuum. Like, okay, so you show up to Panama City and then they walk in and then what? But let's talk about where you were. You're in the main event. We talked about last week, you had been a 6-time Intercontinental Champion. And I tried to relate it to real life TV personality stuff, but you've been the assistant manager, not once, not twice, but 6 times, not just assistant manager of the month or the year or whatever. So are you ever going to get to that world title status? It finally happens here in WCW, and you're in the main events and you're working with what we think is going to be the new boss's boy in DDP. And oh, by the way, the last pay-per-view, you're there for Flair and Dusty's only ever match on pay-per-view. And then you open the most historic Raw in history with Vince McMahon firing you. It feels as if, hey, I got a job for life here, man. I'm in a good spot. And then it's over. And that to me is the story, not just, hey, tell me about the end. Let's get there. And then it's over.
I love it. You putting in the context, and I guess I haven't really dialed that together. So what would that be? 8 days before the last Nitro, I'm in truly, as a boyhood from Hendersonville, Tennessee, a historic match, Flair Rhodes. I mean, there's Hogan, Andre, and there's, we could go down the list of rivalries. But
8 days prior, you're on pay-per-view with Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes.
That's a part of history.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you think about who's the odd one out, I mean, Dustin is Dusty's kid, so he's a natural.
Yeah. But why are you there?
I did the strut with Flair. I mean,
that's it though.
Yeah, that's cool. I got goosebumps.
Well, listen, I appreciate everybody's support. Jeff and I have been overwhelmed, and Jeff, you and I've talked off air when we first debuted the show, or let's back it up. When you and I first recorded the first episode and we got done, you said, well, what'd you think? Everybody knows we talk like that. And I said, dude, we got a hit. And you sort of laughed and you said, don't you think it's a little early to call it a hit? And I said, no, I've recorded enough hits to know when I have a hit, and that's a hit. And I think the response from just day one overwhelmed you. It exceeded your expectations, right?
Blew it through the roof. You just reminded me of an old songwriter, producer, when Garth Brooks stood up on a table in the Bluebird Cafe and sang The Dance. The guy said, that's it. And Garth goes, well, I don't know. I felt real good. Let's see what happens. And the producer goes, no. Anyway, that I just drew that analogy, but no, I think I'm getting that over my skis. It's only episode 2. The thing, and Eric and me had this conversation by text. It's liberating. It's maybe liberating is too wrong, but it's just the format, the on-demand entertainment slice of this, going back and telling these stories, going back to reliving it. And I think the opportunities and the doors and the people, look, I've got DMs from people that, I'll be honest with you, I've got some DMs from folks that I haven't heard from in a long time. And they just said, man, your honesty caught me by surprise.
Yeah.
That's a gift of sobriety. I'll tell you that.
A top guy, a main event guy texted to me to say, dude, this is my new favorite podcast. And I told you about it and you were a little shocked. And then I put us in a for real. Yeah. And it's got everybody's attention, man. And I think that's my favorite part of this is, and I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but people had a narrative about Bruce Pritchard and about Tony Schiavone. And now they're saying, well, wait a minute. And I think that existed a little bit for you. And so when I first announced a podcast with you, a lot of my listeners who listen to the other shows were like sort of eye rolling, like, oh, fuck, this is count me out. And now one by one, I've seen so many of those tweets come in and said, okay, I was wrong. Conrad was right. Because I had the benefit of knowing Jeff Jarrett in real life, and we were able to, have lunch together a few times and just tell real stories without the worry of, hey, what are the wrestling politics involved with this? And as Dusty used to say, where's the money in that? So you didn't tell those stories because in your head, it's about what's forward. It's not what's in the rearview mirror. But because you haven't done it, people are hearing the real Jeff Jarrett for the first time. And to your point, through the gift of sobriety, probably a better version of Jeff Jarrett than would have ever been able to do this show in another time.
Completely. Yeah. I haven't told you this story. So I got, before episode 1, a guy who, he's an event. He runs events all over the country, but really the Southeast. And I wouldn't call him a wrestling guy. He knows me, long-standing relationship, but he knows professional wrestling he respects it because of the marketing. He's been on the fringes of minor league baseball, but from an event deal. Anyway, long story short is he goes, when you said the teaser for My World it's the teaser that you cut. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. I know what you're thinking. another podcast. The guy goes, dude, why are you airing that? What? Why? And I said, well, it's kind of true. He's got 6 other. He goes, I know, but to this audience, I go, well, that's kind of the beauty of Conrad. He's so connected and dialed into his audience. He got up front ahead of that and said, I know what you're thinking. Not another podcast. Dude, you hit the nail on the head with that.
Well, because I do believe, and listen, I've got my fair share of haters, but I do believe in, man, what about just telling the truth? What about just being honest? And which is why I had to atone at the first of episode 1, because I'm like, boy, these guys have heard me shit on Jeff for about 6 years now.
We're going to talk about that.
but I'm just saying that was the character. I hated the character, and by God, you were a heel. That was the idea. So mission accomplished. But now over the last few years that I've gotten to know the real person, I'm like, man, I think he's just misunderstood, and he is a treasure trove of great stories. And I just can't tell you how much fun I'm having with this. I've got a famous.
I dropped a good one on Casio.
Oh, by the way, yeah, if you want more Jeff Jarrett, our great friend Casio Kid has a podcast called Casio's Cut. It's up on YouTube right now or anywhere you enjoy podcasts, totally free. But he did a great interview with Jeff for over an hour, and they talked about a lot of fun stuff. Go check it out if you want more Jeff Jarrett content. It's called Casio's Cut, anywhere you enjoy podcasts. Anyway, I'm saying all that to say my group chat that Casio's in, I told him, after we finished the first episode or before the first episode, but certainly after, because I typed it in all caps, we have the new something to wrestle, because you're so honest and you're so candid, and there are no, Eric had to get comfortable. Eric and I are now best of friends, but he wasn't comfortable at first. And I'm not sure that Arn was. And you get where I'm going.
Yeah.
You and I, because we had enough of a real life relationship, and Bruce and I could finish each other's sentences before we ever clicked record the first time. We were just best of friends. But you and I have had a chance to become friends before we ever clicked record. So there's just a comfort level where you trust me and I trust you. And that's when the audience benefits the most.
Well, our StarCast relationship. Hey, Conrad, you want to put this on Fight TV? I think you just said, I guess, let's do it. Our relationship with, but seriously, in a working relationship, I learned right then, the dude's all about business, and I am too. Let's get this. Yeah, man, it is fun. A lot of fun.
One day, I was talking to Silva the other day, and I realized we're rambling on, but it's at the end of the show. So turn it off if you're not entertained. We'll see you next week for Owen. But I was talking to Silva the other day, and I said, when you think about it, and it's funny because you and Casio had the same conversation and I didn't realize it, but I said, when you think about it, dude, we had Bruce Pritchard and Jeff Jarrett and Pat Patterson all singing together. And now that we know Bruce will never get to do anything like that again, and unfortunately neither will Pat. That StarCast, that very first one, we should do like a little mini documentary or something just about how that came together, because there's so many little behind the scenes stories, like you and I negotiating with those camera people, and you just hit them with that. You can just leave it on the shelf this weekend and let it get dusty. Or, it was just, there's so many little stories about how all that came together, and the whole Insane Clown Posse bomb threat that we never talked about, and so many other little silly, like what?
You pitching eat and greets with me, not meet and greets, the eat and greets.
And you were like, what? I don't get it. What is it? And then by God, everybody's doing it now. I don't know if you've seen that.
Believe me, my promoter cap, I'm like, home run. But the weigh in wrapped around All In.
Yeah.
And I will never forget this look. And I don't even know if I've ever told you the story. So I'm running around doing the fight, producing and broadcasting. Well, we are just going all night. We're just really, chatting. Okay. But me and, anyway, I'm up signing autographs, and Karen, because I was wearing multiple hats, that weekend, but I'm doing autographs and all this. And literally I look up and I go to give the customer their picture back, and literally right in front of me stands Barry Bloom.
Wow.
We lock eyes, and I went, I've never told this story. I went, this is really getting interesting. All In is going to have a few bells and whistles.
Yeah. Here's the thing. Everybody remembers the Jericho surprise, and everybody remembers the Jericho selfie from the plane. What nobody knew at the time was it's Tony Khan's plane.
Yes.
AEW, the sort of proof of concept, was all in. And so many people didn't know that at the time. And there's a Japanese camera crew following Kenny Omega around to do a documentary. And it's just on and on and on. There's so much to unpack and talk about and uncover. And
I knew Barry well enough to know that he wasn't coming to see Conrad's convention.
No.
Yeah.
Well, boys and girls, we've rambled on enough, but as you can tell, Jeff and I are having fun, and we hope you're having fun. Leave us a 5-star review if you think we've earned it. And please tell a friend. That really is the best way you can help our show grow. All of my podcasts have grown through word of mouth. We don't have advertising budgets. We invest in our people instead of ads. So the way this show grows and gets bigger and better, and we can do live shows and just continue to give you this great content, is just tell a friend. Hey man, have you heard Jeff Jarrett's new podcast? It's free. And hit that subscribe button. That's really all we can ask for. And we really appreciate you joining us on this journey. Next week is going to be a departure. You know, we were talking about the nitty gritty wrestling business. Next week, we're going to talk about a great man and pay tribute to him. The man behind the character, Owen Hart. And it's coming your way right here on My World with Jeff Jarrett. We'll see you next week. Your house is probably worth more than ever right now. But if you could change one thing about your house, what would it be? Would you put in a new kitchen? Maybe some new hardwood floors? You can do all of that with no money out of pocket at SaveWithConrad.com. Use your equity to make your house worth even more. You might even be able to get a lower payment too. A better house with a lower payment without moving? Sign me up for that. NMLS number 32416, equal housing lender, SaveWithConrad.com.